And we've organized this event to show you the results and talk about that. In this 5 years of Alliance, I've been very successful in a number of ways. I would like to thank again the generosity of Provivienda when they decided to join us in such a difficult and challenging process and program. Of course, it has not been easy. We have to overcome a lot of different challenges and hurdles, but I think we've managed to achieve very specific results. Now, the objective of the Alliance was to use Housing First method as a spearhead to change the system to address homelessness. There's a transition there that has to be done using a collective system and develop standardized homes on a community basis. So today, with the result of the project, for those first 5 years of the project, we can say that in addition to the results, we also have earned a lot of experience. We've been leading also a lot of changes to make that true. I'd like to highlight some that I believe are most significant, which we're trying to discuss and share with you today. The first one is that we have the full commitment of the public administrations at different levels. And we'll see examples of governments also, of different countries, autonomous communities, and local councils that have decided that they don't want any homelessness in the streets. Second is that we're currently designing specific political policies like the home housing law and the state housing law, which we'll see these bills in the coming months. These political tools, led by this ministry, where we're at today, and a number of other ministries, along with advances taking place in different areas in Spain. This can give us a final push that we need to make the right transition towards a model based on standardized homes. I'd also like to thank the representatives of the two ministries that are here with us, Nacho Alvarez and David Lucas, and the ministries that are joining us today in this meeting. We also have successful experiences at different levels. The experience of Juha Hakinen from Finland, Frick, Patricia Benazuarte, also from different countries, and also we have experiences from Asturias, and also from local council in Madrid, and their commitment to change the homelessness, approach to homelessness in Spain, which Laura Castellana will share with us. Juha, Elizabeth, Fermín, Laura. Fourth, also the commitment of the European Commission to launch a new platform that defines all the efforts and resources needed to face this challenge. Homelessness is a priority in the next round of funding. We also have another platform, Fianza, represented today by the General Manager, Frick Spineman, to talk to us about that commitment. Outside Europe, there's also an international movement regarding Housing First, which is achieving successful experiences to having a real impact. Also today, we have a video message from Tin Aure, who is a psychologist from Ottawa and international expert in evaluation assessment of Housing First. Six, we also have all the information available, of course, from the results we're presenting today. That's from this is the results from the largest program done in Spain regarding homelessness, and keep sharing with us how Housing First methodology is efficient in order to overcome homelessness, and it's also cost efficient for the government. And lastly, and perhaps the only element of the long list I shared with you, the most important part of everything is we have Andrés Alarcón as a direct example. He's a former participant in the Habitat program in Palma de Mallorca, someone that will share his experience in the Housing First program in Mallorca. Political instruments, basically first-order instruments with adequate funding. And in the next 3 years, of course, we can't say that we don't have any funding for this. We also have successful experiences, a European project, information, and people that continue to help us to support us here, helping other people to lead an independent life. So I think these are the right ingredients that no one by 2030 will be homeless in Spain. I'd also like to wrap it up thanking all the hard work of the past 5 years, of the different teams of HOGAR SÍ and Provivienda, and I'd like to send them know that they are part of the solution for homelessness in Spain. We are the generation that has the right potential to have taken on this challenge and to achieve the 17 objectives of sustainable development. We can transform lives, and it is in our hands. So I think we should commit to methods that can prove that this is possible. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today, in particular to all the people that are joining us in streaming, and make the most of the event. Thank you very much.
Y por favor, les pido a los ponentes del primer diálogo que
And I would ask speakers of the first session to come up to the table. Thank you.
Ahora sí. Bueno, buenos días a todos.
Good morning to all of you, to all of you present here and all those following this event through the streaming. Let's start the first roundtable. Joining me is Juha Jakinen, the CEO of Y Foundation, an organization that's working in this in Finland. And for Spin, we've heard about this organization already. So I'd like to do an introduction. And then the whole discussion will be in English, so I apologize to the interpreters. I hope I won't be making it too difficult for them. And so we're going to swap languages.
To all the participants present here today in this international meeting, both in person and online. We start the meeting with an opening dialogue between two of the people who, at European level, have worked most intensely to make the Housing First model a reality in Europe, not only on its conception, planification, but also in its implementation, its evaluation, and the generation of evidence. Firstly, it's my pleasure to introduce you Freek Spinnewijn, Director of FEANSA, the European Federation of National Organizations Working with Homelessness. I have to say that the work developed by FEANSA over the years have been a real and permanent stimulus for the Housing First model in Europe. And secondly, it's also my pleasure to introduce you Juha Hakinen, CEO of Y Foundation, a Finnish organization that is a pioneer in implementation of the Housing First model in Europe. They are pioneers not only because the implementation in Finland was a success, They have also demonstrated that Housing First is not only a good response for individual people affected by homelessness, but also that it can also become a national policy, public policy, which is, I think, very, very relevant, and it structurally transforms the approach to this phenomenon. Both institutions, FEANSA and Y Foundation, launched the Housing First Europe Hub in 2016, a space for networking and mutual learning which generates resources, knowledge and capacity building around the Housing First model in Europe. So I thank you, both of you, to be here today, showing your experience, your reflections, which I think are very relevant. So we began this opening dialogue, and I would like to ask Juha first. Juha, please, could you tell us how is the Finnish model? How can you describe the link between housing and social support, and what are the keys of your implementation?
Thank you very much, and also thank you for this invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. Jose Manuel has asked me several times, and now it was finally time to come to Madrid. He also asked me to remind you that Finland is a real existing country. And that's, of course, a good thing for me because I'm supposed to live there. But that's probably because there has been a lot of discussion about the Finnish model and how extraordinary it is and things like that. And it has been a little bit embarrassing also for us because I think that the only extraordinary thing with the Finnish case is that we are doing ordinary, normal things, or things that we regard as normal and ordinary. There's a long history of fighting against homelessness in Finland, starting already from the 1980s, when Y Foundation, where I work, was established. But since 2008, we have been implementing Housing First in Finland. And it was the result of an evaluation which showed that the former policies that we had didn't address the issue of homelessness in a right way. So the normal thing to do in that case is to change the policy. So we had a small group of 4 Ys where I had the pleasure to work as a secretary, and we made the principles of the Finnish housing first. And probably the critical thing has been that there has been a very wide political consensus behind this Housing First model in Finland. Since 2008, we have had 8 different governments. We always have a coalition government in Finland. There are several parties. The smallest one had 3 parties, and now there are 6 parties in the government. So actually, all the parties in the government, in the parliament at the moment, at some point they have agreed to continue this Housing First policy. And I think that there are 2 important things. When you start housing first, as I have said, you can't have housing first without having housing first. You need to have the housing. And for that reason, the national policy and program that was started in 2008 concentrated also to provide the actual homes for homeless people from different sources. We have been buying flats from the private market, apartments. My foundation has been doing that for over 30 years, so we have a housing stock of individual flats that are almost 6,000 at the moment. But it has took 30 years, so it's a long-term project. And then we have used the affordable social housing, but we have also built new housing and renovated and converted the existing shelters and hostels into supported housing. And this is probably the Finnish speciality in the Housing First model, that the main part is single apartments scattered around, but we have also the supported housing units where you have independent apartments, but you have on-site staff to provide support for those who need more intensive support. And it has worked quite well. Since 2012, homelessness has decreased every year in Finland. since 2008, homelessness has decreased almost over half, and the long-term homelessness by 65%. And at the moment, the last count that we had showed that we had around 4,300 homeless people in Finland, and 2/3 of them were people living temporarily with friends and relatives, so they were not roofless homeless people. And now our present government has set the goal to end homelessness by 2027, including also people living temporarily with friends and relatives. And the city of Helsinki has even decided that homelessness should be ended within the next 4 years. So that's a huge political challenge, and it's also a challenge for the actors working in the field. It's not only about housing, it's also about the support. I think that it's crucially as important element as the housing. And I think that the special challenge with support in Housing First is that you can't actually assess the need of support based on people's previous history. The actual support needs become apparent, and you see them after somebody has got a stable, safe place to live. And I think that this is something that we are constantly working, because, of course, it's not a paradise. We have our own challenges, and we are, of course, working with them. Should this be enough to start with?
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Thank you very much, Juha. I think you have pointed out very important things about Housing First. We are trying here in Spain to have the challenge to keep on doing normal things, as you do in Finland. Political consensus, I have written down that you need to have the housing, which is an obvious question, but in the practice it's not so obvious in everyday's work. Long-term projects, you have to work in a long-term basis, the importance of support, and the importance of success in public policy. I think it's very important to focus on success, not only in doing things, but also that those things are successful. So I pass then to Frank. Of course, Finland is a real country, but it's not the only one, Frank. So what other European countries are implementing Housing First, and could you give us some relevant data about that, please?
Thank you, Patricia. Can I first say something about Finland still? Because, of course, Juha has said the most important thing, but from a distance, we have been following what happens in Finland for the last 10, 15 years very closely. And there's two things that I find really inspiring about Finland. And the first thing is that we have a tendency across Europe to complexify problems in the social policy area. And what they do in Finland is they simplify the problem. Not because they are not aware of the complexity, but because simplifying it makes it easier to make progress. And related to that is that we have a tendency in Europe, in social work and social policy, to focus on the exception rather than the rule. And in Finland, they do exactly the opposite. They focus on the rule rather than the exception. Not that they are not aware that there is people for whom it will not work, but at least to make progress for those for whom it will work. And these are simple things to be said, but not so easy to implement, you know. And I think that explains to some extent the success in Finland. And the other thing is that, yes, you need housing to do Housing First, but you also should not wait for the housing market to miraculously become affordable for all to start doing Housing First. You can actually do it in a very stressed housing market, and that's also what they did in Finland. So that's quickly about our or my perspective on the Finnish situation. About the other countries, because indeed Finland is not the only country in the world or in the EU. There is 26 other ones in the EU. How many countries do Housing First? It's a difficult question. I would say that in one or another form, about half of the EU member states are involved in Housing First now. If you would look 10 years back, it would be less than a handful. But of course, like not everybody is doing the same thing or has the same ambition when it comes to housing first. And I think it's useful to see 4 different categories of progress. There is a number of countries where housing first is really limited to local experiments which are disconnected from each other. Poland, Austria, for instance, there is housing first, but it's not strategic in a way. The second is government-led experimentation. So there is lots of local experiments, but they hang together and there is an ambition to progress on the basis of these experimentations. That you see in countries like Germany, UK, Sweden as well. And then there's a third group of countries where the scaling has started, like people have moved or policy has moved beyond the experimentation and there is the ambition to scale. There you have countries like France, Belgium, Italy, Czech Republic, for instance, as well. And then the last category is the countries where housing first has become mainstream policy. When you're homeless, housing first is the policy that is offered to you. And that's a limited number of countries, of course. Finland is an example, but Norway, I think, comes close as well. And I think a country like Denmark is also rapidly making progress to making housing first a mainstream policy. You see, if I'm saying that, you see a bit of an east-west divide, you know, not so much a north-south divide. You see housing first being implemented in almost the entire West Europe, not so much in East Europe with the exception of the Czech Republic. And I think it's mainly to do with the fact that the shelter system is still very cheap. I think in West Europe, the shelter system is expensive and ineffective enough, to say it a bit provocative, to switch to housing first. So that's important. And the reason why in Czech Republic housing first is being scaled now is because they use EU funding for that purpose. The other thing I want to say when you talk about where are we with housing first in the EU is that you have 2 different types of housing first. You have what we call the sort of more project-based housing first, which basically is doing housing first on top of everything else. You add an approach to what exists. And then you have countries that do systemic housing first, which is basically an attempt to change what exists. You want to address homelessness in a different way. For instance, transforming shelters into housing first units. And I think like there is a bit of a gray zone between the project-based housing first and the systemic housing first. But I think that what we as FEANZA would like to push for is the systemic housing first, that you don't add it as a new policy or a new approach, but that you transform the way housing first is done. But if you look at the overall picture, because sometimes we get a little bit carried away by the whole housing first dynamic, there is hundreds of thousands of places in shelter still in Europe, and it's growing every year. We estimate in FEANZA, it's a rough estimation that there is 600,000 beds in shelter at the moment, and every year there's thousands of beds being added. If you talk about housing first beds, we're talking about 10,000s, not 100,000s. It's also growing, but we're really, really far away from a tipping point at European level, so there is still a long way to go. And one of the major challenges that we face, Juha said earlier on that in Finland homelessness has consistently gone down, which is a nice context to do housing first, because you can claim that it works. Many other countries in Europe are doing housing first in a context where homelessness is growing. And that's really, really complicated. You need policymakers and politicians with courage to do housing first in that kind of context. And I hope that the European dynamic can help to, how to say, harness this courage of policymakers to make them progress on housing first in difficult circumstances.
You've spoken about EU funding, so I would like to make another question. From your point of view, what is the role of the European institutions and the importance for the EU to support the scale of housing first?
I think the European Union can do a lot, but the European Union will not do it automatically. You will have to ask the European Union to do it for you. So that's a call to all Spanish policymakers and other people here to say, well, yes, there is a lot possible, but you have to push for it. I see 4 things that the European Union can do. everything that relates to further building the knowledge base of Housing First and the evidence base of Housing First, that's something that the European Union can do. Many of the questions related to Housing First are the same in many countries, so why not pool the questions and address them at European level? Also remember that Housing First is a policy in development, so there is a lot of new knowledge that needs to be generated. So that's the first thing the European Union can do. The second is promoting and helping member states to do Housing First by, for instance, organizing training for social workers or for policymakers, that kind of thing. That's perfectly possible for the European Union to do. The third thing is to steer and monitor policy progress. We know, and I'm not sort of pleading for a name and shame approach, but it's good to know for countries where they sort of rank compared to, how they compare to other countries to sort of get that dynamic going. And the fourth area is financing. Funding is an important one. But maybe very quickly to say that all of this happens in a context which is quite favorable. José Manuel already mentioned that the European Union launched the EU platform for combating homelessness. It's a very recent initiative. It was launched in June under the Portuguese presidency of the European Union. 27 member states have signed up to it, which is exceptional on a social policy issue. So it means that there is consensus to work together at European level on the issue of homelessness. All member states have signed up to the Lisbon Declaration, in which they commit to work together at European level, but also to work towards substantial progress towards ending homelessness in 2030. I don't think that the commitment is to end homelessness in 2030. The commitment is to sort of change the paradigm from managing homelessness in the shelter system to ending homelessness and making substantial progress by 2030. Now, all that platform is being operationalized now. We're working on a work plan, a budget, etc. But it goes without saying, there is no doubt that Housing First will be a primary focus in that work. So when I said earlier on there is a role for the EU, well, we can fit that role of the EU within the EU platform for combating homelessness. And it's also important here to mention that the presidency of the European Union will play a very, very important role in further developing that platform. And the Spanish presidency is not so far away. I think it's the second half of 2023. Yep, exactly. Belgium will be in Spain will be in trio presidency with Belgium, and Belgium has also committed to work at European level on homelessness. So I think that is something that can be done. Very quickly on housing, on funding, because there is unprecedented amounts of money available for homelessness at EU level. There's grants and loans. We have the tendency to only look at grants, but I think we should do an effort, be creative and courageous, and also look at the potential of loans to do Housing First. When housing is in the picture, then loans become an option. So I wouldn't disregard that. In terms of grants, you have the usual structural funds, ESF, ERDF. There is more than ever opportunities in ESF. Just to give you one example to look at, I'm not saying that Spain is doing badly, on the contrary, but France has a really quite ambitious program when it comes to homelessness and Housing First in the framework of ESF. And then there is the Corona money, like we call it, is the Resilience and Recovery Facility, which is billions of euro that go to the member states, and that could be used for homelessness and for Housing First. And some countries actually do that, and I think Spain is one of them, if I'm not mistaken. Another country that has really shown quite a bit of ambition with the Recovery and Resilience Facility is Italy. 160 million euro made available for Housing First under that funding program. So a lot is possible if there is sufficient will. And then there is the loans through the European Investment Bank and the Council of Europe Development Bank. Also, that is a possibility, and countries are looking towards it. What is important with financing, it's the same as with the role of the EU. The money is available, but it will not sort of fall into the homeless basket automatically. You will have to fight for it, administration as well as the public administration as well as the NGOs. And we're calling on the EU to provide proactive support to the member states to actually do something with the money that is available on the issue of homelessness. So that's very quickly what I could say.
Thank you, Frank, for this widespread view. I go now to you again. I think networking is quite an important thing too, because Housing First has a European status. I think at European level it has been promoted and it has been widespread all over Europe. So there is an important institution which is the hub, and I would like to ask you, what is the role of the hub? What can we learn from the hub? How we can participate in it? What are the products you are developing?
Well, I think that Housing First Europe Hub has now established itself as an important structure of cooperation in Europe, and there are several Spanish organizations also involved. And I think that for us in Finland it's important, because otherwise we are a little bit a remote country in Europe in many ways, and we need also mutual cooperation, we need exchange of experiences. It has already taught us quite a lot. And by the way, without the hub, I think I wouldn't be here now. So it has created permanent connection also to for example, HOGAR SÍ and many other organizations. We do in the hub training, there's research, there's advocacy work, and actually there's a major event within the hub coming next spring in Madrid, when we are publishing the report on the systemic change with Housing First, and it will be an important event. The hub was established after FEANZA had finished this Housing First Europe guide, and we realized that there's a need and a potential for more intensive collaboration. And I think that if I compare some other areas, the collaboration that we have on homelessness is now on a very good level, and it's very bringing good results in many countries. And I think that it also has gradually shown to some countries that how critical role the shelters and hostels play in this effort to change from managing homelessness to ending homelessness. And I think that you can't get the full potential of Housing First in a context where shelters and hostels are still the main option for homeless people. And for that reason, the transformation of the shelters and hostels is so important. I understand that there's a lot of fright also among the organizations that run shelters and hostels, but our experience has been that after the renovation, when they have moved into Housing First-based permanent housing, their role has become more important, and they have got new potential and even new economic resources, like happened, for example, with the Salvation Army in Finland. And I think that this kind of learnings we can now deliver within the hub also.
Thank you very much, Juha. Yeah, I think we all have to deal with some kind of resistances of different one, money, cultural resistance, or the frightened to change. I would like to ask you both about the future of Housing First. How do you see the future?
Johan knows better the future.
So go on, Johan.
Well, I think that it's important to understand that it's not ready. Housing First is, in my thinking, it's a concept that can and must develop with the time, and when we meet new needs. For example, I think it's rather challenging to try to provide scattered housing, even with support for young people who have very acute drug problems. And for that reason, you need to have different housing options. And for that reason, the supported housing that we have with more intensive support has played an important intensive role also in the Finnish context. And then I think that there's room for innovations. When I came here in Plain, it was almost full of Finnish people who came here to spend cold and dark winter months in your beautiful country. And I got the idea that maybe we could ask them that if we could rent their apartments in Finland while they are here for homeless people. So that's an idea that I have to think about.
Yeah. The problem here is that we don't have so many people moving to other country to leave their houses available for housing first, but it would be nice, Frank, your view of the future.
Yes, well, I don't pretend to know the future, of course, but I'm hopeful that we can, like, that the dynamic has evolved to such an extent that the way back is difficult. And I believe in European cooperation. If we do it well, I think the European Union can be really a support. So I'm hopeful, and I'll keep you updated, of course, that this platform will be a real structure and a real added value for the member states and actors in the member states to push for housing first. But I agree with you, that we have to focus on innovation, originally, because we stole the idea to some extent from the US, even if housing first existed already in Finland before we discovered it in the US. But we tend to focus on chronic homeless people. People that are homeless for more than a year. And I think in the US that makes sense because basically you want to provide housing first for people with complex needs. And in the US, if you're long-term homeless, you are likely to have complex needs. And if you're short-term homeless, you're likely not to have complex needs. But in Europe, it's not necessarily the case. In the countries where they looked at the link between chronicity and complexity, Denmark, for instance, they found that no matter how long you're homeless, you have complex needs, which means that the potential of housing first as a standard intervention is much bigger in Europe than it is in the US. But it requires us to innovate and think of different target groups. Like in the hub, we're working with housing first for youth, for instance, or housing first for women fleeing domestic violence, etc. So I think we'll have to gradually broaden the target group to allow for this systemic change. So I think if we do that, if we're open to innovation and if we use the European framework to our benefit, I think we can make quite a bit of progress.
I have to add one thing, because when we are focusing on housing first, it's easy that we forget the aspect of prevention. And that's of course the crucially important thing, that we could have less homeless people dropping into homelessness. And in that respect, in prevention, in the Finnish context, the affordable social housing has played an important, crucial role. And for that reason, we don't, for example, have family homelessness at the moment.
To very quickly add, it's related to what I said earlier on. Let's not be overly dogmatic about housing first. I say it with the boutade, but we have the impression that the inventor, the so-called inventor of housing first, Sam Semberis, is less dogmatic than his followers. We have to see it as a policy in development, because otherwise it will just be another approach added to the existing approaches, and then the impact will be very small. But let's take time. Like what we learned in Finland as well is that they took time to get where they are. I don't know, you have like the first program dates from more than 10 years back. So if you have political consensus, you can also afford yourself to take time, but let's not try to do it in one political mandate, because we're bound to fail in that way.
Okay, I would like to ask you, Frank, one more question about the European platform. Yes. What is your view about the platform? What should be the challenge of this European platform?
Is the streaming entirely open? Because no, like my view is that it will be some, like, I know that there is a bit of fatigue about European cooperation, and I sympathize with that as well. Like, there is certain things happening in the social policy area at European level where I wonder as well, like, is that worth the effort, But I think with the platform we can do something new, like do something that is not fitting the usual structures. Because there is so much demand for cooperation on housing first, I think it can actually work. But there is still a lot of efforts to go through. That's why I was appealing directly to you, Patricia, like the Spanish presidency will be important, the French presidency will be important to sort of give the platform the role that we think it should have. But I'm really optimistic that it can work, but it's hard work. We're working with the bureaucracy at EU level, which is quite inert, quite slow, but I'm hopeful. Like you wouldn't expect me to say anything else, but
Okay.
I'm honestly hopeful that it will work.
Yeah, okay. Well, we have almost finishing this opening session. I would like to give you the floor to say some final words, and I would like to ask you an advice for us. We are in our way to launch a new strategy. We would like this strategy to be transform the way we face homelessness. So please give us one advice each.
Well, I think that it's really important, of course, to work together, like in Finland, the ministries, municipalities, NGOs, but it's also important to set very clear, concrete goals. And of course, you have to make the aim to end homelessness. If the people working in the sector even don't believe that it's possible to end homelessness, so it's an impossible task. So that's the thing to do. Set a goal to end homelessness. Nothing else is enough.
Yeah, I agree, and make sure that your goals are realistic, that you spread them over time, because we know from experience that if you set the goals too high, you will not find a lot of political support to actually go for new strategies. So you lose time in that way. And maybe it's a very practical suggestion. Of course, homelessness is especially an issue in big cities, but don't forget the potential of small cities, especially when it comes to housing first. Like there is a lot of smaller cities in Spain where there is a few dozen or a few hundred people that are homeless, where actually solving homelessness through a systemic housing first intervention is a more realistic objective in the short term than in some of the bigger cities, and that can add to the dynamic. So my call would be, don't forget the smaller cities.
Okay, so we've finished here this opening session. Thank you very much to both of you for your presence here today, for your reflections, and your. I think you have very quickly, but you have touched every important thing. So we will take into account for our strategy. Damos paso, por lo tanto, a la siguiente mesa. Sí.
Okay, so we move on to the next panel.
Un coloquio sobre la vivienda como solución al sinhogarismo, y ya pues invito a los participantes en la mesa a subir.
The title of the next panel discussion is Housing as a Solution to Homelessness. So I will invite the speakers to join me at the panel.
Buenos días a todos y a todas.
Good morning.
Gracias,
Thank you, Patricia, Juha, Frank, for a very inspiring panel. And certainly some of the comments, some of the things that we take away from Juha's and Frank's participation, I'm sure it will be a good beacon for us to follow when we address homelessness in Spain. Now, I'll take my mask off. So, as you can see, I'm not José Manuel Caballol, my name is Maribel Ramos. It is my turn now to moderate this next panel. It's a great honor for me to share this panel with two of the people can offer, come up with a real solution to homelessness in Spain. So already we know that you have quite a challenge ahead of you, but I think it's also a very positive, a very good task, very positive task. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State of Social Rights, the Ministry of Social Rights and Agenda 2030 to welcome us in his ministry, so we can all be together here today and share housing as a solution to homelessness in Spain. I think that's the title of this panel. We believe from Provivienda and HOGAR SÍ, we believe strongly in SDGs and the solution. And many people believe that homelessness is still linked to the objective one of eradicating poverty, which obviously it is. But the key target for us is objective 11, which is based on ensuring that cities are more inclusive, safer, flexible, and resilient and sustainable. And this basically translates into cities becoming or being capable of people having this reciprocal link between human development and urbanization, people that live in cities. To do that, we need to come up with spaces for living which are based on justice, equality, and within Europe also well-being, which is a very European concept as well. But also, as a base principle, is that everyone is inclusive for everyone. And as we go down that path, a lot of people that suffer from homelessness are left behind. And we need to make sure that cities are inclusive, to make sure that that doesn't happen. We don't want it to happen, of course, in cities, but neither in rural areas where homelessness has less impact, but nonetheless still happens. The goal of SDU 11, the 11th goal that is that Spain has committed to ensure that everyone has access to housing and basic services, adequate, safe, and affordable services. We still have 9 years to go, only. And Finland has set a challenge for 7 years. So congratulations to that. But only 9 years and no one to be left behind. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. And here's my first question then to my panelists, to both Nacho and David. How can Housing First contribute, as well as the approach of housing? How can Housing First contribute, plus our approach to help eradicate, to end homelessness, so no one will live on the streets? Nacho? Good morning. For answering that question, I'd like, first of all, to congratulate you. Congratulate you for this event. As you know, in my ministry in which I work, we always collaborate and support. We want to support this event because we believe it's also very useful to be able to sit down and discuss different methodologies, such as Housing First. And thank you for the work you're conducting from Provivienda and HOGAR SÍ. Unfortunately, this is a phenomenon that's more visible than what we think. I'd like to, and I'll just answer your question. I think it's, we know that in Spain, housing in general, not just people that are undergoing exclusion or have no home, is an increasing problem in Spain. And statistics show us that vulnerable homes in Madrid, Catalonia, dedicate more than 50% of its revenues to provide housing, either in some form of renting or under ownership. But of course, when you include utilities, that becomes more complicated. The last report that we have from APN, the percentage of homes that cannot support their own household at proper temperature is more than 10%, an adequate temperature. So when we think of public policies from a housing point of view, I think the first thing we need to address or acknowledge is that to step in from housing and focusing on housing, it's crucial in order to address the process on how do we end poverty, how do we end homelessness. And it's difficult to think of public policies that can guarantee and to fight poverty and social exclusion without including having an approach, an all-encompassing approach, unlike strategies in recent decades that we've followed in our country vis-à-vis housing. So I think we have to be focused on housing. I think that's one of the keys in order to have successful housing public policies in order to address social exclusion in general, and certainly to fight homelessness. So now specifically to answer your question, Housing First as a methodology can be useful to help us develop public policies. They can help us as a beacon, really, because it's not an abstract approach. They are not. They're actually a specific method that has proven results and is shown to be successful in other countries, either in pilot projects, wherever that may be. And the reasons are obvious, because we put people in the very center of the public policies, and we address their needs, of course, fully respecting people's needs and independence. And if you focus on housing as a first resource required in a process that will enable us to end homelessness, is critical. It's key. I mean, obviously, it's obvious, but it's in fact quite revolutionary. And the fact is that where we've had pilot projects in this regard, we see that this approach is actually working. So I think it can help us, and it can be a good reference for public policies in Spain to develop the right policies. And to bring my answer here to an end, I think it's, as I said, it's useful to address homelessness, but in general, also to consider other cases of homelessness that go beyond homelessness itself. I think we have the pilot projects we have are good practice that we can, that I think public authorities should certainly take into account and should be taken as a benchmark for public policies. Thank you very much. David? Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank HOGAR SÍ and Provivienda for organizing this event, but also for the permanent cooperation that we have from the Ministry, from the Secretary General of Housing to draw up the proposals that I will now share with you regarding the national plan, but also with the national strategy that we're following for social rights, and perfectly coordinated in planning for solutions. Now, but before that, I'd like to thank the Ministry of Social Rights for all the good work that we're doing jointly, not just on the strategy, housing strategy that the government is following, but also because we have first draft bill for housing, adequate housing, a right for housing, which we've never had. We've never had a housing law in Spain, a general one, ever. I was actually looking at that in our history books, and this is, in fact, the first law that we have in the history of Spain. There have been laws, territorial laws of autonomous communities, but not at a state level. And I think it's a wonderful, it's a very good effort that we'll be developing vis-a-vis finding solutions and guaranteeing rights. And that's not just about that. It's also facilitating homes for people that don't have one. It's something that has to be done here in Spain. It's since democracy was reinstated, we've not been able to guarantee this right. And I think through this law, obviously we're not going to solve all the problems, but it will set up the foundations so that we can address this more successfully and be able to guarantee this right, particularly in Spain's constitution, Article 43 of our Magna Carta. So I just wanted to start my discussion with this introduction and just share with you what we're doing, and also share with you all the work that we've been putting together and conducting throughout the year. Especially last year, there was a benchmark process. Provivienda and HOGAR SÍ know about this because we set up for the first time a very specific program in the state housing problem to face homelessness problem, to face the homelessness problem in Spain. People that have been left without a home, or people that have a problem to own a home or to have one. In the case of women with gender violence, have lost their homes, and many other circumstances that we take into account. It's a significant program that we made progress, and also was developed thanks to the contributions of other numerous organizations, including HOGAR SÍ and Provivienda, in order to come up with this solution. It was set up during, of course, the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. It wasn't a compulsory scheme. As you know, the Spain's state program, what it does is set up a number of aid that's then channeled down to the different autonomous communities that have the responsibilities, the competency to do that, and they have to develop the programs. And of course, those programs have always been linked with the state program, and the autonomous communities roll out these programs based on the needs that they have in each region. Each region, of course, is different, and the needs are different. So the national state, or the state plan, I should say, that has addressed this plan. And for the first time, we set up these needs, this plan, and we set up aid for regarding aid in different levels to be able to support the home, to pay for utilities and support these individuals, because housing is an objective in itself, in addition to the social action that can be done in parallel with the people that at present don't have a home. But the housing has to be part of the program. It has to be an element, a key element that has to be provided, in addition to other proposals that have to be implemented or rolled out with these individuals. The current plan is at a high level, is inherited from the previous government. We amended it last year. It comes to an end on the 31st of December this year. And the new state plan that we're working on for the 2022-2025 period will continue to consider this program. It's an improved program, and I'd like to thank again Provivienda and HOGAR SÍ for the contributions. And it's based on experiences such as Housing First. They have been very successful experiences wherever they've been implemented, and I think we have to support them, underpin them. And so what we do is we take a new step forward in Housing First in the proposal, not only improving how the program works in itself, but also establishing something which is critical, which the program will now be a priority within the state plan. What does that mean? It means that we not address other programs in the autonomous community while demand for this program has not been fully addressed. Why? Well, we have a huge concern in Spain to provide solutions to housing problems. There are multiple problems, there are many players, the three-tiered government system, which makes it more complicated. There's other organizations or NGOs that participate and are engaging in this challenge, but we want solutions to be practical, valid, and to reward people that don't, or help people that don't even have a home. So, of course, we're making, the state plan is helping in numerous areas, in rental, in construction of social housing, etc. But we have to realize that there's people that don't have a home, and that is a priority in the state plan. It has to be. And that's why the program, which we've been working on with the support of different organizations, we had a meeting with HOGAR SÍ and Provivienda not long ago to fine-tune some of the elements that are contemplated in the program, and it has to have a priority solution to housing and housing for homelessness. It has to be a priority for us because it's linked. These solutions have to be is, of course, requires to have a good housing, in addition to other arrangements and agreements that we have with SADC, for example, and other organizations or programs that are interlinked that will fight slums, fight against slums in Spain. There are different proposals that come up out of this idea of housing first, to provide a home and to act on this in order to act on the right for housing. There are multiple proposals, of course, that we have, and this has to be linked with the different challenges. You can see shortly we will to see the draft bill that will be raised to the cabinet meeting on the 20th of October next week. This will be the basis to solve problems. Obviously, it won't be a final solution. It's a very complex problem and requires many players to participate and help us, and also resources. And resources, of course, for the first time, the funding here reaches the highest amount ever in Spain. From the previous budget that we had, up until recently, the People's Party of 75 million euros, that was the budget for housing, to the next budget for the period 2022, which is 3.2 billion, is being multiplied by 7. So the challenge here is to spend that accordingly, make the most of these resources. I'm sorry, I think I've probably gone on more than I should have, but I think there's important information that I want to share with you, and to understand that it's not just, not only do we have a willingness, but there's also a lot of potential, a lot of possibilities, and the challenge is there to ensure that everything can be done accordingly. Thank you. In fact, probably of all the public instruments that we set up, obviously will not solve directly the problem, but of course when there is a problem, we do have to start, we have to have a beginning. So I do appreciate that we're actually taking steps forward in that regard. And Patricia already mentioned the Secretary of State for Social Rights. We are currently drafting the strategy to put an end to homelessness. So I hope that's the objective, of course, to end homelessness. What we'd like to know is how are you going to integrate different approaches? Frank already shared with us the two approaches that we have in Europe, where you see some countries, a housing first approach adds to other solutions that are already being set up, and some countries that are just committed to make it into the main approach and a way to transform the system. So I'd like to know what the Secretary of State is developing in this regard, and what is the approach and what is the strategy? Well, going back to what I said earlier, housing policies will be and are the key to successfully bring an end to poverty and homelessness, and that's where the government's commitment comes in within the framework of the new housing law, which is to build or start building, set the foundation so that housing is a new pillar to well-being in Spain. Well-being in Spain was more fragile and developed later than other countries in Europe, and with some remarkable differences. But one of them is that in Spain, we've never had a genuine public housing policy, public rental policy. So I think the new law does set the basis for this to start to change. So I think that's important to highlight. Now, on the national strategy for homelessness, here what we have is open dialogue with different entities, NGOs, and third-tier organizations that have been created for this purpose. And what we need to do is to start defining that process. But I think the discussion and debate of the government with these third-tier organizations is making progress. And although the coordination of the national strategy is a responsibility of the ministry, when we address homelessness issues in Spain, require calls for a lot of work, intense work, shared with obviously the Ministry of Transportation and also with the Secretary General of Housing. And I think that's the first thing that we can show that's happening in the design of the national strategy to address homelessness in Spain. It's something we can prove and show that's happening. So there's I would say there's a big agreement here to develop the strategy, and that is to overcome the public policies that don't show having been successful or not based on empirical data on successful cases and haven't been contrasted or assessed. And this is important to highlight because some policies need to be buried, and others have shown significant impact and usefulness, and will help us to make progress. And I would say there's a third element in this discussion we have with these entities, with these third-tier entities, and that is that we take a significant leap forward with this strategy to address homelessness in Spain. It's something that's been left outstanding, not undone in policy in Spain. So we have to design a national policy in this regard, ensuring that this is at the heart of a policy. And here the idea is to raise housing first methodology to a public policy. Finland's success case is very clear, and we'll land these different discussions and discussions that we have in Spain and other countries on whether the method should develop on what should grow on what we already have, or should replace altogether what we're doing. And Spain, we should say that public policies here in homelessness have been so weak and frail that we're pretty much starting from scratch, I would say, at least in many instances. And another point that the Secretary General of Housing, David, may mention, and I'd like to comment on, which is critical. Without funding, this one is never going to happen. We will never have a new focus on housing, particularly public housing. Like in other areas, it is critical to have adequate housing. This government's commitment with sound financing for housing, as David said, is clearly reflected in the budget for 2022. They have been forwarded already to Parliament. I'm sure they'll go forward and multiply by 7 the financing for housing that we had in previous years, and that shows a very clear commitment. But what I also say is not just a general commitment of the government with housing policies, but also through the policies we established in 2022 and also next generation funds from the EU. It introduces an item of over 6 billion euros for developing pilot projects with the services sector, which will allow services sector to develop pilot projects aimed at deinstitutionalizing this. And we hope that among different services, different initiatives through Housing First, linked to development of policies to end homelessness, focused on individuals, will be financed through pilot projects that hopefully in Spain will guide us in the drawing up of these policies and then scale up these policies to the different autonomous communities, of course, which in this field have the competencies, and they could use these projects, these pilot projects, in the coming months and years as a good practice to make progress in this field. Thank you very much, Nacho. I remember a few years back, some of us, we went to visit public policy in Norway. We went there to see that, and they said something that was wonderful. They said the fourth pillar of well-being in Norway is housing. I almost broke to tears. And I almost broke into tears when Nacho said that housing first will become a public policy in Spain, a statewide policy. I get immersed. I can almost not to cry. It's not my role here to cry, but I'm very pleased to hear that. Honestly, it's very exciting for us to see that, for other people who have been working for many years now to see that, to ensure that no one is left behind, to hear from someone with your responsibility to give that sort of support and commitment. So I really appreciate that. And also, I'm also very thankful to see you've reached an agreement to approve, to pass this housing law, because the services sector, the working with homeless people, is a historic claim. So we're very happy to hear all about this, and we congratulate you for that. But I think there's still quite a lot of work to be done before all this comes to fruition. Now that we can be happy about that agreement, and I'm sure it will arrive at a good port. Now, out of the state program, you've already told us, David, but we'd like to know if you could tell us what is the future housing law, what is it in store for homelessness, focused on housing? What role can service sector play, since we have a lot of reps here, representatives here from different organizations, and a lot of them following us the streaming? What are the opportunities does that represent for ending homelessness? And secondly, what role will the services sector play? Well, again, linking up with what Nacho was just saying, I fully agree with what he said. I think the law is being developed with that idea. It's meant to be one of the pillars for well-being in Spain. It currently isn't, because it's not contemplated as such. It's not contemplated as a basic requirement, and this law is being drawn up with the idea of introducing that. I think anyone in Spain, anywhere in fact in the world, needs to have a stable project and vital with a clear outlook on the future. If they don't have if affordable housing is not possible, and that's what's not guaranteed in Spain. Throughout the past 45 years, in our democracy, we've not been able to solve that. Of course, we've addressed and successfully solved many other things, health, education, gender equality, etc. There's still a lot of work to be done in all these fields, but this one is behind all others. And that's why this law is being developed. It needs to be approved, of course, in Parliament and the Senate, but also needs to be rolled out. So as that's been done, we need to continue work on planning, and of course the actions need to be developed. The new state plan is based on a principle, and that is everyone must have housing. That is the main point of the law and of the plan. It also addresses, of course, other things, help for rental aid, so you can have access to rental home as well, to boost the market, come up with a public rental offering, and to protect rental properties, public rental properties, because we need to protect them, ensure that it cannot be sold. You'd be surprised by the fact of statistics in Spain, but back in 1980, at least the report that we conducted since 1980 to date, since the competencies were transferred to the autonomous communities, 2.3 million homes we've had 2.3 million homes on protection, public protection, but most of them is for ownership. Few are the total inventory for rental, not for rental. So public administrations only have about 390,000 in rental. It's a very small market. In fact, there's some that have even sold them. So what we want to do is protect the public rental housing, strengthen it, and create even a larger number. So the idea is to boost another 100,000 at state level, in addition to what the autonomous communities might do. Of course, there's also other areas where it's more difficult to access housing because you're dependent, because of gender violence, or because young people that have difficulties in having access to home. These are many different elements that are involved in the plan. But the biggest problem is people that don't have a home, that don't have any housing, or people that are going to lose their homes. And based on that, it's potential homelessness. So I think we need to address the current problem and prevent future problems. We need to be preventive. That's why the schemes that are trying to solve the problems are the ones that we're going to set up as a priority and as compulsory within the plan in order to face the problem. And despite that, we won't have solved the problem because it's an extremely complex problem. There are many different players involved, autonomous communities, local councils, private property, investment funds, the state, services sector. But what we do know, all of us who have been working in this field, what we're trying to do is make sure that all these programs and all these actions are linked to the services sector and to organizations that will help us come up with solutions to the proposals from the public administration, because the government cannot provide solutions to everything, to all this. Now, despite all this, we will still have issues, problems for years to come. But I do believe it is the first time that we do set up a foundation to set everything in a logical way and also in an efficacious manner as well. I think at present we are setting up the right mechanisms in addition to funding in order to come up with these solutions. But also, of course, the competencies, as you know, have been transferred to autonomous communities, and they have exclusive power in that regard. So I'm sure that there are regions where we'll be able to make more progress than others, where we won't, probably for political reasons. But if we can set up a priority and compulsory mechanism, ultimately, we will push forward to attain these targets. And finally, final remarks. In the past year, we've been addressing and talking a lot about housing. Well, actually, we've been talking about controlling rental prices because everything else was easy to reach an agreement on. Not so much how to achieve, how to control or lower rental prices, but rather the instruments to achieve that. I think the objective was clear, but more the issue was the instruments to do that. So I believe I think that's been really the only main challenge we've had with the two main political parties in Spain. But certainly we agreed on everything else. Certainly the right was fully supported. But it's been other things that have been a challenge, but we've solved, and I'm sure that we continue to fine-tune over time as we see and assess results and improve, of course, all the work we do. But I think the understanding, nevertheless, has been very good and is a clear before and after in order to develop that fifth pillar of the state of well-being. Well, we want to congratulate you for that agreement. Sometimes it's difficult to reach an agreement, but of course it's always very good when we find that people that have the responsibility make an effort to find that common denominator, which of course can be improved and also based on it can be improved, but will have an impact on people. And please ask me to be very brief now because we're running a bit tight on time. Housing first, what does state is that it's necessary to coordinate housing and social services have to be fully coordinated based on specific needs of individuals, as you already mentioned. First the housing, but then, of course, address what support needs people have. So a very short answer here, please, but very specific. What actions, joint actions, does this strategy, homelessness strategy, and the housing strategy, what coordination elements do you find there? And what do you think can be developed in addition to the coordination that you're carrying out between the two departments? Of course, it shares when you're in the same building, of course. It works when you're in the same building, but, or I should say it helps. But can you tell us, are you thinking of a specific coordination mechanism between the two of you so that housing policy goes down one path and social services down a different one? So that local, autonomic, and state levels come in different crazy process, where in the end we find that it's us having to establish those mechanisms.
Sí, la Estrategia Nacional de Personas Sin Hogar está por desarrollarse en este punto y todavía es difícil.
It's difficult to anticipate what will be the issues on this policy, but the starting point is quite clear. Based on our previous experience, we've seen that providing homes to homeless people without a subsequent follow-up by social services is ineffective. And of course, social services must have the resources to do that. And I think we're doomed to understand each other, housing and social services, because otherwise public policies in the area of homelessness will fall short of the objective. Providing housing infrastructure to homeless people requires support from social services to implement these policies fully. Otherwise, policies will be ineffective. And I think that we can all agree on that. That's why I've said before that a national strategy for the homeless cannot operate efficiently without the full cooperation between both departments. And I think everyone agrees on that. Yes, I fully agree. I think that we are not only doomed to understand, we must understand each other. And I think we do understand each other, because the greatest example of interministerial cooperation during this term was between housing and social services, not only for the enactment of the housing law, but also because of all of the measures adopted to fight against COVID, which obviously required a close coordination between housing and social services. In fact, that is the purpose of the new housing law, such as, for instance, the attempt to try to avoid evictions of families with children or more socially vulnerable families. And these required cooperation, and of course this also required a better coordination with the social services at all levels. So we must, we're doomed to understand and coordinate each other, because we cannot just remove housing from the overall social services policy, because obviously housing first determines that everyone has a right to have a home, but of course this also requires the support of social services to try to provide a living, comprehensive living solution to these homeless people. I think that there is willingness to understand each other, and it's absolutely essential. Housing and social services must be interconnected for the sake of efficiency, because the main idea is that no one in Spain can be without a home, but not any home, but a house, a home where there is dignity and respects the dignity of human, of the people. Yes, well, I hope you can come to an understanding on that, because obviously what is at stake here is the life of many individuals. So thank you. And I would like to thank Nacho for hosting this meeting at the Ministry. I would like to give the floor now to Tim Nacho, who is a researcher at the University of Ottawa.
Aparte de ser una persona brillante e inteligente, tiene un corazón que no le cabe en el pecho, así es que os dejo con su mensaje, y a continuación también os dejo con el coloquio, con la presentación de resultados de la evaluación de nuestro programa Habitat, con Sonia, Juan y Leticia, y sobre todo con Andrés, que es la razón por la que estamos hoy aquí. Andrés es la persona más importante de esta sala hoy, y eres por quienes nos movemos todas las personas que estamos aquí. Así es que de nuevo muchas gracias.
So once again, thank you very much
en otra como esta.
To the hosts of the meeting. And
Hola desde Canada. Hello from Canada. It's a pleasure being with you here today. To say a few words about the important research, to say a few words about the important research on their Housing First been undertaken by HOGAR SÍ on their Housing First programs. The housing outcomes, first of all, of having 96% the housing outcomes of ending their homelessness 96% of people over the course of the study is very high. And consistent with the study is previous research and that we did in Canada, as well as research that's been done elsewhere. As well as research. It's also noteworthy how quickly people ended their homelessness as a result of receiving Housing First. As a result, I'm also impressed by your non-housing outcomes. I'm also impressed by your non-housing outcomes. For those participants who received Housing First, with them reporting a better quality of life, with them reporting a greater improvement in social support, improvements in mental health, in social functioning, compared to those people who received usual services. Compared to those people who these are also in line with previous research, but they even go beyond what we found in our large Canadian trial that we conducted in our large Canadian trial. The findings in the reduction of social services, the use of social services by people who receive Housing First in your trial is certainly similar to what we found in Canada. Finally, the economic findings coming out of your study are very important. The offset are very important some program costs related to Housing First as a result of reduction in health, social services, and justice-related costs are consistent with our findings in Canada. We found that these reductions in service costs offset 69% of Housing First program costs for those people who had the highest level of need. A population that's similar to the one in your study. The combination of very high housing retention for Housing First participants with modest program costs that are offset by reduction of service use indicate very strongly that Housing First is a wise investment of public funding. So congratulations on your important work. I look forward to seeing it published in the scientific literature. Feliciano, HOGAR Sí, Fundación Grace, y gracias.
Bueno, buenos días a todos y a todas.
Good morning, everyone.
Y también a las personas que están
those of you who are here in this room, and those who are connected via streaming. I would like to start this panel discussion thanking, first of all, the privilege of being here with you today.
Normal y formal, y apelemos a la
emoción. Let me just make an appeal to our emotions.
En esta posición,
I feel very moved.
De llegar desde un largo camino que empezó hace ya muchos
here today after a very long journey that started many years ago.
En esta mesa, cuando solo hablábamos de 20 viviendas y parecía algo
some years ago we talked about 20 homes for the homeless, and it looked something like a dream that could not be reached. But we would like to give you a human perspective of the issue as well, because Maribel has mentioned that after all this is just for the benefit of people. I would like to thank the people, the staff at HOGAR Sí for making Housing First a reality in Spain. And of course, this has been a long, difficult journey, full of obstacles. We would like to thank the staff of Fresno, of which I am a member, especially the field staff who has conducted a survey to homeless people in very difficult circumstances. In many cases, however, they made this survey a reality. I would like to thank the staff at the Universidad Complutense of Madrid, especially Sonia Panadero, who is a professor of the Department of Personality Assessment and Clinical Psychology, and Juan Martín, professor of Applied Economics at the University Complutense of Madrid, who are responsible for these assessment. And finally, last but not least, I would like to thank the presence of Andrés Fernández, sitting to my left, who participated in the Habitat program in Mallorca.
Ha logrado dejar el programa atrás,
pero sigue vinculado. Ha tenido una trayectoria en situación extensa de calle, con entradas y salidas de los recursos habituales que no eran housing first. Conducted a survey, an assessment of the resources that were used to deal with the problem of homelessness beyond the framework of Housing First. So the first question is, what are your conclusions from this assessment exercise? Well, thank you for these very kind words of introduction and for giving us the opportunity to participate in this panel, in this very important event. Well, first of all, I would like to emphasize the fact that we just tried to follow up on a number of international assessments that had already been carried out so that they could serve as a reference to our first attempt at implementing Housing First, trying to overcome some of the difficulties that have been detected in earlier European initiatives. We chose to put in place a very careful, ambitious methodology in place. Well, it's true that Spain was lacking this type of assessments and had no prior experience on this area. Regarding methodology, it's true that we try to be careful, we try to generate as solid an evidence as possible, defining a control group, and we implemented, well, a number of measures throughout the 18 months that took this program to implement. And this made our lives complicated, as Leticia has said. The field work was truly impressive, and Leticia did an excellent job of coordination. There have been many participants for quite some time. More than 430 individuals were assessed, homeless individuals with very complex difficulties, with very difficult situations, who shared their experience with a team of surveyors. And 18 months later, 240 people repeated the survey so that we could draw some conclusions. And these were individuals from 13 different Spanish cities. But obviously, one of the biggest contributions to the assessment was the evaluation, the assessment of the financial side of these initiatives. Well, good morning. Let me try to describe this to you briefly. Well, first of all, I think that we have reasons to celebrate because this has been a very tough and time-consuming job. And it was truly a major challenge to the members of the team of the Universidad Complutense of Madrid. And of course, it was tough to take this challenge, but sometimes we had our doubts, but at the end of the day, we concluded that it was indeed worth our time. Well, maybe I'm banging my own drum here, but I think we've worked very hard. Well, having said that, I would like to start by thanking the institutions that promoted this type of programs, such as Habitat, HOGAR Sí, Provivienda, and Fresno, who relied on the public university, Universidad Complutense, to conduct this assessment. So, what is the economic approach to this effort? Well, of course, social sciences are always complex, but homelessness is especially complex. And we had the added difficulty that there were no data available. There was just some statistics. So we had to start from scratch. And Leticia asked before what was the outcome of the evaluation. And to us, the most important lessons were the economic approach and the field data acquisition. We have approached these from the bottom up. First of all, we asked the homeless people, what services do you use? What is the frequencies you resort to these services? Once we identified those services, we then asked the people responsible for providing these services so that they could give us their own feedback.
Claro, es que además llevamos mucho tiempo esperando con la pandemia para contar todo esto. Entonces,
am I just speaking too much, maybe? Well, anyway, I am very grateful to the organizations that collaborated providing this very irrelevant financial information. What other challenges did we come across? Well, first of all, we had to compare our control group with an with the experiment group, but there was a lot of overlap. We had a very specific treatment, Habitat, but on the other, the control group, but on the other side, we had a very diverse group of situations, people who received support, people who did not receive support. Well, I might say something about this later. We contemplated the possibility what would have happened if we had just provided support and assistance to the control group for 30 days in a row. Would the outcome be different? No, obviously not. Well, we also conducted a cost-effectiveness analysis and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into details, but in summary, after all this, I think we can say that Habitat is cost-effective. And that would be my main
Yo creo que estamos
take
ávidos de escuchar
from the experiment. Well, I think we're all looking forward to hearing what Andrés has to say. What did you feel when you were told that you would have a home for yourself? Well, first of all, I would like to thank the program for giving me the opportunity of being here today with you. 3.5 years ago would have been unthinkable for me to sit here talking about my life experience. What did that mean to me? Or what did I feel when I was told that I would have a home for myself? Well, I had been living on the streets for more than 1 year. I used to sleep in a shelter, but, well, sleeping in a shelter is just like sleeping on the streets. I am not going to talk about what I saw there, because the conditions were awful. You slept there with hundreds of other people, and you had to sleep with one eye open to prevent people from stealing your stuff. So I'm not going to go into details, but it was really awful. So when I was given a home, I thought, well, you're lucky, you have a house for yourself. But it took me a few days to just come to grips with the idea that I had a home for myself. It was unthinkable. But Housing First gave me not only a home, but not only a house, but also a home, because it became a home after a few days. It gave me a space where I felt safe, I felt at peace. I had a lot of time to think about my situation, and when I found out how the program really works is when I said, well, let's do it. I believe in this. Well, I had been in shelters many times, in and out of shelters, and it was not a very pleasant experience, as I've said before, but this time I felt it was different, because I felt that the staff of the Habitat team was working for me. Juan, for instance, one of the members of the team, is now one of my best friends. So this really helped me start healing my wounds, emotional wounds, psychological and even physical wounds. So I started a healing process with the support of the program and the tools they provided. But at all times, you are the focus of the program. You are the one who makes the calls. You are the one who decides. And based on my decisions, the program, well, reacted. If something was wrong, they let me know, but I made the calls. So with time, well, I recovered many things. I recovered my dignity. I recovered some values that I had lost, such as family, honesty, humility, because I was really a very conceited person. I did not need anyone when I was out on the street, whereas I realized that I really needed a lot. And then, first and foremost, I recovered my self-esteem. And that's what the program provided to me. And I started to recover family, as I've said before. I really reinforced, recovered my family ties. I recovered the love of my daughters. And this really was absolutely crucial to me because I felt like a person again. I felt like a member of society. I was walking tall. I felt like just one more person, just like anyone else, because when you live on the streets, when you're homeless, you feel invisible to everyone, whereas I started to walk through the streets just like any other person, just like any other member of society. And even though I was 50 years of age, I decided to change trades. I became a gardener. I used to be a gardener, but I landed a job as a mechanic, which was one of my passions since I was a child. And this is something that I achieved thanks to the Habitat program. But of course I had to do my part as well. And the truth is that I realized that it was working. And it was doing, I was doing very well. Thanks to the program, and thanks to that, I am here with you today.
Sonia, afirmáis que
Sonia,
Housing First es un programa
so you think Housing First is efficient?
poniendo de relieve a lo largo de toda esta
I think
sesión.
this is something that
¿Qué es lo
we
que nos
really
dice la evaluación en concreto? ¿En
heard
qué os basáis
throughout the
para
session,
afirmarlo?
but what is the basis to make that statement? How can you explain that? Well, I think that the results were very much, that we achieved were very much in line with the results from international initiatives. Housing First focuses on doing away with homelessness, and that is, of course, the most relevant measure. And as I've said before, after 18 months, 96% of the participants in the Habitat program were staying in the homes. Whereas in the past, 27% of the people who were housed in shelters, for instance, had not resolved their homelessness program. So the Housing First was very positive for the retention of housing and the stability that it provides to the people who enter the system or the program based on Housing First. There is always one indicator I was thinking about when I was listening to Andres, which is the issue of safety, the victimization issue of homeless people, and we found very alarming information. Approximately 60% of homeless people who had been referred to Habitat program had been the victims of crimes during the previous 6 months, threats, insults, robbery, abuse, etc. This is reduced among users of the Habitat program down to 18% of those cases.
But the numbers still stand about 40-something%, which certainly from my point of view is scandalous, still too high. So it appears that Habitat not only provides decent housing, stable, but also safe, which enables the recovery that Andres shared with us. We also get positive results in other indicators which are key, such as discrimination, that people that are in these circumstances experience. We had figures of up to 60% of discrimination among people that were referred to Habitat, and this drops to below 20% just a number of months later, while no reduction takes place in people that takes place in the group of people that participate in the control program. And of course, that has all related to with the experience of loneliness that people that are homeless experience. We can see that posted there, we talk about 90% of people that no longer feel alone 18 months after joining the Habitat program. I think Andres already told us how he's recovered. However, in the assessment, we don't show significant improvements, but rather they're related to family relations, but they do show certain recovery on the frequency of contact with the family. Perhaps I'm going at length here. Leticia, okay?
Por otro lado, también es verdad que se ha hablado también
And we've also spoken about the use, the pattern, how resources being used, social resources, are decreased, diminished, and also the pattern of use of health services, and also a significant drop in the use of emergency ward, as well as hospitalizations among people that participate in Habitat. Obviously, it appears that they make more use of health services more than other people, most of us. This is very much in line with the results obtained at international level. Also, sometimes the absence of certain results that we find, we don't really notice a significant decrease in consumption of alcohol among the users of Habitat, which again very much in line to what we find in other countries. Well, Andres, after listening to Sonia and these indicators, after the assessment of this, we'd like to know, do you really identify yourself with that? You've already been telling us about it. You've already told us about your experience, but do you identify with some of these results that we've attained? And how has housing changed your life? Well, there's no question that housing has to go hand in hand with the social resources. I had to resort to professionals to stop my addictions. I also had a labor advisor who helped me to find a job. All these social resources have to go hand in hand in the program. And with the housing, of course, no question. Now, thinking of this sort of program, housing, we've already heard in the news on a daily basis the cost of housing. Ultimately, that all impacts us. One thinks of the cost, or as a manager of policies. I'm sure that a lot of them are listening to us now. And probably what they're thinking is, fine, this is, of course, you get good results, but at what cost? Does it really pay off? Is it financially feasible? Juan, this question is for you. Well, indeed, Leticia, thank you. That is our mission. Obviously, it's complex, and certainly it's the key assessment of the program, because, of course, there's international success stories that show that it works. But can we afford it? Is it worth it? Well, I think we've seen it already. We believe so. The answer is yes. It is feasible, economically, financially feasible. If we look at the early results and the analysis, one might think that it's an expensive scheme, but that's because we're looking at a reality that's kind of offset. With the way we're looking at it is different from what it should be. And that would damage. If we do that, it would hurt the main feature of this program, which is it stands and it's supposed to be behind me, that it has a very high housing cost. So obviously the daily cost does not compare at all with other social services. But that's clearly offset with a fact. Certainly all of us here know it, and homelessness always has a cost. The cost zero does not exist. We find that in the basal stage there was an average cost of the sample at 100 euros per month, because it costs money to live, and that's not just housing. Very important, obviously, is also the role that other social services play, that we all use, health services, etc. So there's no zero cost in homelessness. And in addition, that we're comparing two groups. We're saying that they're homogeneous, but the programs that they receive are heterogeneous. So you can't really compare apples to apples here, especially because in the control group there is a huge diversity. People that had some services, benefited from services, others that didn't. So what we've done is to corrected that outlook before we came here to explain the results through these working assumptions. And the control group, we placed it in an assumption of receiving housing 30 days a month. Housing comparable to Habitat, not at the same level of quality, but certainly at the same level of intensity. Now, by doing that, the differences of both groups, control and Habitat, pretty much were ironed out. The average cost for both groups, the difference is 1.64%, the difference between both. So 28 euros more a month. So it is not more expensive, hardly more expensive. We do think that we did assume that the control group had 100% occupation, like Grupo A, the Habitat, had. So this puts pretty much the cost issue on a level basis, on a tie. And as Sonia mentioned, and Andres has shown us, the results, the quality of the results, on the impact on people, and the efficacy is superior. So we start seeing the results and the light, and the positive impact, and we realize that it's cost effective. It obviously shows that Habitat and Housing First initiative is a quality initiative. It's, I would say, good value for money, and it has good results. But it's interestingly enough, it's not more expensive, and therefore it's better. However, this is the first analysis. There are a lot of challenges from a technical point of view. We've had to make decisions that perhaps could have been different. there's a lot of things that we need to look at carefully. And we do have to carry out measurements. I think that's been discussed also. And it's not just housing first. We have to make assessments and measurements. All of us have to do that before we render results. And a very important thing, it's not just a matter of money. The cost-benefit analysis has shown that that is not the money that explains the results, but the features of the program. Not by spending more money, you get a better result. That's what shows, once we've discounted the cost impact, we see that we get a better result in the program. So, feasible? Yes, it is.
Gracias, Juan.
Thank you, Juan. Question to the two of you. Do you think housing first is a solution to end homelessness? Well, I think I just said that. Well, yes, I just have to confirm that. Given the results that we've achieved and the work we've conducted, I think that
prudencia que yo creo que nos caracteriza como académicos.
But also the result we found academically and as researchers, there's no question. And I don't think I've ever said this. I would say yes. At present, given the information that we have at hand, I think that it's undoubtedly, one can say that it is useful. And in fact, it is positive in our context. Okay, so we want to bring this panel to a close with Andrés' opinion, with a final message. And Andrés, can you tell us? Well, I'll give you the floor. You send a message to the people that manage these policies and tell us, what does Habitat provide that other solutions do not to help you reach the point you have reached now? Right now, you're an independent individual. You've recovered. I've been impacted by what you said. Your self-esteem, your independence, to feel part of society. So I ask myself, can we afford homelessness? So, Andrés, it's always... Go ahead. It's always very emotional for me to listen to you. Well, what can I say? Of course, it worked for me. Housing first works. The difference is, I already mentioned this, it's individualized, because when it goes individual, when it works on each individual, you realize that each person is different. We have a different range of issues and problems. When it's a group approach, you don't really feel that is working for you personally. Housing first, I thought was very innovative. And I would say people that manage public policies, all politicians, to say them that it works, so they should definitely adopt it. And I take away what has already been mentioned here in the panel, is that housing has to go hand in hand with social services that you provide to people like me. And it appears that that's what they're working on. What else can I say? I'm living proof. 4 years. Clean. And it's been everything for me, certainly at a personal level. That's really all I can say. Well, thank you, Andrés. I would say, add if I may, that we want to continue to work and cooperate. Andrés is also cooperating and helping and supporting other people. As he said, that's full proof of it. And, well, thank you very much to all of you. And now we move on to the next panel on housing, the role of housing and social services in Housing First.
¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo van esas energías?
How are we doing?
Ya
Energy-wise, we're almost coming to an end in this event. I'd like to thank the organizers and also the colleagues of communication who have done all the prior work to this event. We made this possible. Now, this is the final panel on the role of housing and social services in Housing First. I'd like to remind you of Andres. I thought that was very emotional, particularly when he said that he felt that the team was working for him. That's quite a change, isn't it? I remember the early methods of Housing First when we spoke about a choice or focusing on people, on individuals. What I think what we need to is ask for a round of applause for people that help and participate in this program.
Fue muy interesante escuchar antes tanto a Nacho
very
Álvarez
interesting to listen to David Lucas and Nacho Álvarez about the coordination. But here what we want to do is focus
y ver de qué
how we can, how the role of social sciences and housing, how this actually lands in both specific programs. So with us, Fermín Bravo is the Director General of Housing from the Regional Government of Asturias, Marín Enin from DIHAL, Access to Housing, Laura Castaños, General Manager or Director General of Social Inclusion of the Local Council in Madrid, and Guy de Boll, Coordinator of Housing First Belgium Lab. So we're a bit pressed for time, but we'll go straight to give the floor to Fermín Bravo. Asturias is a pioneer in establishing Housing First as a public policy. So I wanted to ask you, how do you think this coordination with housing and social services, how is that being critical to make it possible? Good morning, thank you. First of all, to thank the organizers and Provivienda and HOGAR SÍ for the invitation and for, of course, and the ministry itself. I think it was October in 2015, not too far from here, just down the road in Caixa Forum, when the whole thing got started, where there's we started the before and after. I was involved in that particular event. I was just being appointed in my current role. And there was one thing that I had very clear in my mind, which is this thing here. Piece of paper. But this is a rental contract of public housing for rental. Not for rental. I signed it myself and the tenant. And that's what really matters. That we can, from Vivienda, we realized that we wanted to guarantee the right to housing and to make that instrument, carry that through our body, and through our public housing inventory, which is the second largest in Spain. Since 2003, we've set up a policy in Spain.
Está englobada en la Consejería de los Servicios o los Derechos Sociales. Ya ha llovido, ¿no? Pero nos parece muy importante.
Of course, that's a long time ago, but I think it's very important to realize that we were pioneers there, and a lot of autonomous communities have done that too, but what you find that you're constantly in meetings with the input, necessary input to realize of how to address the needs of vulnerable people, which is what I want to talk about. Of course, housing policies are, of course, is many different things. Is talk about lift and energy efficiency, but the tool that we want to work with from a public housing point of view, that this would be for the more vulnerable people. Now, if we've managed for gender violence people in Asturias have an instant access to public housing, why can why can't we do that to homelessness? Let me give you an example. 30 weeks ago, this is how we work. A social worker of a small local city in Skopje, a small town, said that a woman victim of gender violence has to leave her home immediately, 9 o'clock. By 1 p.m., she had the keys to her house with a contract, with a signed lease contract. So it can be done. And we have to introduce that into our system. We were asked by the ministry how many asked for help. 9 of 13,000. And all of them, most of them are in the public rental housing. And most of them, I think only 9 are left behind and not have subsidy for some reason, but almost all of them, the ones that have public housing, obviously don't have any subsidies because they're in public housing. Now this contract shows the model that Housing First is a model that's transformed the whole system, but also the way we serve people that need these services, be it whatever they called, social housing or SEPE in Asturias, or housing for the elderly. When you focus on the people, changing our model has really helped us to consider the whole process and the whole system. Obviously, housing is critical, but also the way we service to cover the basic needs. At that time, it could very well be food, it could very well be housing, still with dependency, but start working on the individual, on the person that we support. In our Housing First model, the customer, now this is a word, it's not a customer, tenant in this case, because they're part of the program, they remain, they stay in the house, in that public home, and they stay there until, while they comply with their obligations as stated here in the contract, and of course, as long as they want to remain in our social housing for life, if they so decide. It also depends on the policy. So we've made a lot of progress, and how that's now reflected in the state housing plan. But it's very important that we start changing things. We believe policy is very general, it can be very general, and I think, of course, we have to have cooperation with the private sector for different things, but housing policy for vulnerable people and in rural areas can only be done from the public sector. It cannot be done if it has to be profitable, and that's how we continue to try to develop it. We've achieved in 6 towns in Asturias. In fact, we've done that in 6 towns. In Avilés, no homelessness people. In Oviedo, out of the profiles that we've had, there's no one. There might be an odd one. But in Gijón, we're going to add 5 more homes by year end. The final count is 73 people in the whole of Asturias, of homelessness in the whole of Asturias. So I think it's possible to make progress here, and we need to continue to work here with coordination. We need to have housing, of course. I'll bring it to my presentation here to close, but we have to coordinate, and we have to make sure that social inclusion has to be part of it as well. Thank you very much, Fermín. Always a pleasure to hear what you have to say. Manuel,
the French evaluation is one of the...
From the French evaluation.
We would like to ask you how the data collected has helped to scale up Housing First.
Thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you today, but I fear I might just be about to repeat a lot of things that have already been said, because I realized that the experience we had in France is actually very similar to what has just been presented. And I was thinking when I was listening to all the speakers before that this similarity is actually a very good thing. First, because we were in the very same situation in 2017 when we hold the same meeting as you, putting out the results of our evaluation on Housing First. And being here today and listening to you is a really great piece of encouragement for us, because it reminds us that we are on the good track, on the good way, and that we should keep on working in this direction. And I think every single experience of Housing First in any country not only builds the case for Housing First in their country, in their own country, but also at an international level, and it's very useful to have all these kinds of evaluations popping up and converging to the same results. And the second thing is that I think this similarity shows the strength of our European network, and I think we draw inspiration from each other, we encourage each other, we make progress together, and it's also a very good thing, and we must keep on in that way. Coming to the French experience, the Housing First program was launched in 2011 by the French government. It was an initiative from the Ministry of Housing and the Ministry of Social Affairs, who funded the program at half and half. And at the same time, they launched the evaluation. So from 2011, we've had an evaluation carried out by an independent team of academics. It was carried out over 6 years, so up to 2016, and it was carried out over a group of 700 people. But from a very specific segment of the homeless population. It was addressing chronic homelessness, so people with an average period of time without a roof of 8 years, and people who had also psychiatric disorders and severe mental disease. So we had half of the group going into the Housing First program, and half of the group being followed as a comparison group. The Housing First program is also very similar. We provided, of course, direct access to housing with a strong social and medical support. Going quickly to the results, we had a retention rate of 85% after 2 years and 4 years. So for this very specific group of people with very high level of needs. And we also measured improvements in health, in well-being, in recovery, and we also had a cost-benefit analysis, just as you, and it was shown that the Housing First service was very cost-efficient, that it was generating savings, net savings for the public authority, and for two main reasons. First, the decrease in the use of social services, and especially shelters, and second, and that was actually the main drivers for the cost reduction, was the drop of the use of health services, not in terms of frequency, but in terms of the length of the hospitalization periods. So we observed a decrease by 50% of the number of nights spent at the hospital for those people who were in the Housing First program. So overall, it was estimated that it was a net saving of 6,000 euros per person per year. So of course, with these kinds of results, it's very easier. It's much easier to go to the government and say, okay, we need to scale up. It's not that often that we have such evidence-based policies, so I think we need to really take advantage of them and build on them. So the scaling up decision was made in 2016, and from these 4 pilot sites, the government decided to go up to 20 sites, 20 cities where we would implement this program by 2021. And today, in 2021, we have actually 32 locations in France where the program has been implemented, and 2 experimental sites for, dedicated to young homeless people. So it's still managed at the national level by the Ministry of Housing, so I'm part of the department which is coordinating and implementing the program, and it's still focused on homeless people with severe mental disease, so it's still very specific. But we really felt in 2017 that there were bigger lessons to be learned from the program, and that if it worked on this segment, those people with very high level of needs, it was probably working on people with the lower level of needs and the general homeless population. So we wanted not only to replicate those teams, because those teams can only support 100 people at a time in one city. If we wanted to scale up, we needed to change the rest of the system, what we called in the experimentation the traditional service. If we found the traditional service was less efficient, why not change it? So at the time, in 2017, the government budget for homelessness reduction was 1.7 billion euro, and it was mainly going into shelters, emergency shelters, and collective shelters. So we asked ourselves, what can we do with this kind of resources? It's quite a big amount of money, and maybe if we can shift it towards a more of a housing-led policy, we can be more efficient. So that's what we've been dedicated to over the last 5 years, doing this shift, make the shift happen, and how we can go from a system, a policy that is really shelter-oriented and emergency-oriented towards housing-led policy that is building up on the housing first principles. And then came a paradox about the housing first evaluation. Of course, the housing first evaluation showed that the program was useful, relevant, efficient, and it helped building up a large consensus on housing first. Everyone now thinks that housing first is a good model, is a good way to go in France. But at the same time, we heard people, and we still hear people saying that, okay, but look, you showed that it worked in this very specific program with very specific resources, high level of funding, and so we can't do housing first if we don't have these levels of fundings, these skills in the teams, medical skills, all of the social skills, etc. So the challenge since 2017 has been to move from a very protected environment, I call it a protecting environment, with a well-defined program with well-defined resources, to going from there to real life, actually, where public policies do not always coordinate well, where there is a large number of different actors with different roles and different competencies. There is a huge amount of stakeholders, public and private, etc. So the housing first evaluation was, of course, decisive. It was a decisive lever to move forward. But fighting homelessness requires to think and rethink what already exists. The traditional offer that we found less efficient, and that's what we're trying to do. We've been trying to do over the past 4 years.
Thanks for your words, Manuel. I think it's very inspiring, the French example, and I think here we should take that into consideration in scaling up housing first. Thanks. Pasamos ahora a hablar con Laura Castaño.
Okay, now we're going to give the floor to Laura Castaño. Laura, Madrid is one of the cities who is really very focused on housing first as the best approach to fight against homelessness. So what conclusions can you draw from this experience in Madrid? Well, thank you for this invitation. Let me tell you something about myself, because I think it's important for you to know what is it that we're doing at the City Council. When I enter into the office, in my office, we have a picture of the skyline of Madrid, which says Madrid dreams, so that no one has to sleep on the streets. And of course that sentence really highlights that there is a great responsibility for all of us and serves as a motivation, of course, to do our job and do it well. And Housing First played a very important role here. The city of Madrid launched a very innovative experience in 2017 with a collaboration with with a municipal company, and of course social policy and housing had to cooperate very closely to implement these at city council level, and these led to a number of recommendations, but it was just a beginning because this was not supported by social policies that would help us set the necessary guidelines. The collaboration with the companies of the sector was essential, and they are a very true reflection of that collaboration between the city council and the services sector. In 2018, we launched a tender to award the Housing First contract with the corresponding terms and conditions and technical specifications. And we do have already very promising results of this methodology. So we are still moving forward in this direction. A new tender will be launched shortly, Q1 of 2022, and this will just be one more step forward in the consolidation of this methodology, because it will provide a greater amount of public housing to this methodology. So we are taking firm steps, and well, we think we're moving in the right direction. The city of Madrid is convinced, from a political discourse point of view, that this is the line of work that we wish to keep. But having said that, we've realized that it's not enough, because all of the stakeholders need to embrace and accept these methodologies. So we are now at a perfect storm of all of the public actors, because this methodology, this policy has the full support of the public institution, but all of the stakeholders are convinced that this is the right path to follow. Madrid is really a huge monster, and it has a long history in the fight against homelessness. It offers more than 1,000 beds in shelters, but the truth is that the approach has always been one of social emergency, taking people off the streets. But I think we can just take a step forward now and think about the quality of the service we provide, and about a focus on what is it that people need. If you ask someone in Madrid who is living on the streets, a homeless person, where do you want to go? Well, I think the answer would be very clear. So if we monitor these people and we assess their needs and the situation, this is the basis for the assessment of public policies.
concretar tú algún resultado, si no...
I don't know if you need to hear more details. Well, in the work Well, this we do. Well, these shelters, which are also part of the Housing First, well, these are essential actors because I think these shelters need to work on the autonomy of people. It is complicated because this requires a set timetable and a certain organization which are essential, but they also focus on promoting the autonomy of individuals and to provide dignity and a decent life to homeless people. Well, thank you, Laura. That was very interesting. Of course, there are many challenges ahead, but of course, maybe the first question we need to ask ourselves is what do these people need?
Thanks for being here with us.
Okay, Gert.
We find a process of scaling up of Housing First that could be applied in Spain, all right? From small pilots, you'll reach the commitment of the governments for continuing the model as a politic of ending homelessness, as well the evaluation. So our question for you is, how is Belgium in the implementation of Housing First as a public policy? And how did you make it? I mean, how did you pass from small pilots to a big policy?
Okay, thank you, and thank you for having me here. I remember 2 years ago we were here with a group of Erasmus, and then we heard some noises about some sickness that came over from China, and now we are here back again 2 years later. I see you all wearing those beautiful masks, so it's nice to be here again. I'm here from Belgium. I'm a coordinator of the Housing First Lab, and we are an umbrella organization trying to make the link between the government decisions and the public organizations on the field. So it's indeed, like you said, it's as Freek told us, Belgium is one of those countries where Housing First is a supplementary addiction to the system. There is a lot of staircase models still in use in Belgium, but we had that Housing First model as a new methodology. It started before 2013. In some cities there were already some experiments going on, but in 2013 there was an experiment on the national level where we would see if Housing First was something that should be possible in Belgium also. We started an experiment. 5 cities were involved. After 2 years we had really nice results, and the train was going on. It started with 5, then we had 7, then we had 9. Now we are with 18 different projects, which are all doing Housing First, but all in their own way. Like you have your paella, and every mother is making her paella in his way, but it's all very nice food. So it's the same with Housing First, and it's more or less our job or our intention to find the recipe and to say what's essential in that paella, what is really needed, and what's extra taste and extra color you can add. Nowadays we are working, we are finishing a new call. We had really to focus on the methods of Housing First, because we see that Housing First for some in staircase model, providing a house to people is the end of the story, and then everything is done. But in Housing First it's the point where we start, and then we see that people can take back their lives, that they make new plans, have new dreams to focus on. So we really invested on how can we do that. That's really interesting to see what the results will be there, and we think in the next year to tell a lot more about that. And now we are really on this scaling up process of Housing First, where we have the known organization who are doing Housing First, the big cities, and it's still growing. But the Minister in Belgium of Social Affairs really wanted to push and to go for that scaling up, and she provided a lot of money for existing organizations to go further, to have more networks with social housing companies, that the scaling up goes faster, but also for some new territories, and that's really interesting. That's happening really on this moment, where the national government provides some incentives, some money, and then the local authorities say, oh, there is money, now we can do it. There was already some will to go on with Housing First, but now we have money, so 1, 2, 3, and it's something that's really going on. What also helped us a lot was working together with some research institutes who are focusing on counting homelessness, because it's really a shame that we cannot say in Belgium how many people are homeless. We see a lot of people on the streets in Brussels, but we cannot provide a number, and it's really something that's difficult because there are estimations, but this goes from very low to very high. It's also a political question that some people want not to know it and have are a bit afraid of if they know the number, it will not. They will be held responsible. But we had a really great experiment on that, on some cities where they did a really detailed count of homelessness, and in the results they always put a number of you have that amount of homelessness, and within that amount of homelessness you have really that group. Mostly it's about 18 to 12 to 80% of people who's really focusing on the Housing First solution. So that it's not us, it's not social workers from the organization that say that Housing First is a solution. It's also that research that shows if we are going to look for a solution for homelessness, Housing First is one part of it. What I also hear today is Housing First is a solution to homelessness, but it's not the only one. You have also to look for the right to housing. That housing is possible for many people, that there is a way to look for prevention, that people can stay in their house if they have lost their job due to Corona, that they are supported to keep in their houses. So it's not only, oh, wait till you're on the street and then we will help you with the Housing First program. No, it's better to prevent that they become homeless. That's more effective than investing in Housing First afterwards. I have a lot of things to say, but it's like Manuel said, it's already late, I think, and there is already a lot been said, but I want to end with the focus on the European level. I would not be here if I had not the chance to participate in Erasmus programs, in exchange programs, in the training of the Housing First. It's really interesting to follow what's going on there. And I hope that, like Freek also said, that we can find each other, Belgium and Spain, in the presidency of the European Council within some years, and that we can work together to let it grow and let it go further once again.
Thanks, Gert. Certainly, in Europe, we are going through exciting times with the platform ahead of us, so we'll have a look. Vamos a pasar a la última
Okay, let's move on to the final round of interventions. Fermín would like to hear your views about the future of Housing First in Asturias, your region. Well, I think we need to develop Housing First as a methodology for other groups of people. We must move forward in the provision of housing for vulnerable people, and also as an assistance which must be provided either by housing or by social services. We are now very closely involved in our public housing pool and providing assistance to the tenants.
O alojamiento, que no tiene por qué en algunos casos ser vivienda, yo creo. Yo creo que ahí está el reto, ¿no? Hablábamos estos días, creo que el reto, entre los muchos que hay, es decir, que queda mucho para hablar,
de la
coordinación, ¿no? De los servicios sociales hipersaturados, o infravalorados, que son el coche escoba de todo lo público, ¿no?
Social services,
sobra alguien, acaban los servicios sociales.
Which are completely
que eso hay que valorarlo y relanzarlo también, pero en esa coordinación necesaria debemos ir implementando cuestiones. Yo creo que hay que arreglar el concierto, se hablaba aquí, ¿no? Sí, hablemos de verdad, ¿no? Porque ideas podemos tener todos, pero luego hay que poner.
Talk about
se habla del cuarto o el quinto.
Money, because we all have ideas, but these ideas need funding. We talk about the welfare state, and that's just fine, sounds very good, but the welfare state accounts for 50 or 60% of the total cost, because the money we can save from Housing First really benefits health and social services budget. So the money is not unlimited, but of course we cannot provide everything from the welfare state. We will have to reach an agreement among the parties. When we talk about housing,
es decir, no hay hipoteca por debajo de 10, 15, 20
these are
años.
medium-term investments. Mortgages are normally 10, 15, 20 years. If we want non-profit housing developers or private developers, because we need the private funding as well. We cannot just provide housing from the public institutions. So this is essential. We need to find this right
lo pusimos en
level
vivienda,
of coordination.
Tenemos que implementarlo también con presupuestos, porque si no, no vamos a poder hacerlo, la acción concertada del acompañamiento. Nosotros en la acción concertada de las organizaciones sociales tenemos un doble servicio, que es proveedor de vivienda. Usted
in this respect, housing providers, we assess the price of your housing, and we also have someone who provides the assistance, so that they can provide both housing and assistance,
o que es proveer vivienda, o puedo hacer la otra,
or
que es yo tengo la vivienda, pero tú me provees.
In other words, I have the house, but you must provide the assistance.
Tenemos que conciliar, porque es posible,
and the final challenge
lo privado.
is that we need to
el acompañamiento es un problema, la inclusión social es un problema social.
Come to grips with the idea that a private housing
desde Asturias no somos partidarios de la imposición,
supplier
sino de la
requires
pero la fórmula de mezclar
a solution
privado puro y
to
duro con
combine the private developer with
el proveedor del derecho a
the
acompañamiento.
provider of the right
muy interesante también,
social assistance.
Hay un ejemplo como la Socimi Social de intentar vincular el capital privado más promotor con un acompañamiento porque va a dar
an
beneficios
interesting
a todos,
experience
incluso al
is
promotor,
like a
porque
social
problemas de salud mental, de consumos, de dificultades de inclusión
SETI,
social,
because
así en todas
we
las
have
comunidades
problems of
vecinas
social exclusion and mental
público-privadas
health
en este
in
sentido.
all
Creo que es uno de los retos
the communities of the country, which require
Fermín, por
public-private
tu claridad, sí.
collaboration.
Manuel, just a brief question. The future of Housing First look in France?
Yeah, well, as I was saying, that it's for us, if we want Housing First not to be only a very specific and small program, but if we want it to, you know, to be adopted as a set of principles for all the public policies and by all the actors, we have a long path ahead. And I think there are three kinds of conditions that are needed, required, if we want to achieve this. First, a strong and continued political support, and my neighbor has really well emphasized that point. Of course, providing money to homelessness policies for sure, but also having a very strong, committed social housing policy, social support policy. Of course, everything that has to do with the environment and how people don't get into extreme poverty and don't end up in the street is of course the key to achieving zero homelessness in a few years. The second thing is that if you have a strong political support, but if you don't have an entity that has the legitimacy to shake up a little bit the things, the way things work, the way the programs are work, the way the organizations are structured, if you don't have this, then going from political support into implementation is very difficult, because we see that we need to change a lot the way we work to achieve Housing First. So in France we have this. My entity at a national level within the Ministry of Housing has a strong mandate to implement Housing First and housing-led policies. So we kind of have this legitimacy to go to other ministries, to go to other actors, even private sector actors, and work with them and show them the vision we have for the future. And the last thing is that we need in-depth stakeholder engagement. Of course, this is a policy that requires a very strong coordination, very strong partnership. In France, we have, of course, thousands of NGOs working on this, on homelessness. We have thousands of social housing providers. We have also thousands of local authorities. Maybe you're familiar with the layered administrative structure of France. We have on top of the national state 4 different layers of local authorities, and fortunately for us, one of them has nothing to do with housing, but the rest of them all have a part to play. It can be on housing provision, it can be on housing policies in general, but also on social support or medical support. So we need to make everyone work together in the same direction. So I'm quite confident about the future of Housing First, but it's still a long way ahead, and I think at the very beginning it was said that it cannot be achieved over one mandate. It needs to be something that you keep carrying over a very long period. So that's our objective.
Good luck with that, with all that work. Thank you, Manuel. Laura, antes nos avanzabas sobre el futuro de Housing First, esa licitación inminente en el primer trimestre, pero no sé si te atreveréis a avanzar más allá, qué pasos son los siguientes en el crecimiento de este modelo en el Ayuntamiento de Madrid.
Bueno, como te comentaba al principio, estamos en un proceso de transformación a nivel interno importante, separando la atención a personas sin hogar de la atención a la emergencia social, que es en el ámbito en el que hasta ahora se estaba desarrollando la atención a las personas sin hogar. Entonces, claramente la apuesta es por este modelo, pero al mismo tiempo somos muy conscientes de que la implantación de este modelo no puede ser mediante fórmulas bruscas o cambios radicales, porque al mismo tiempo conviven con otros espacios, con otra red, con otros centros de acogida, en los que, bueno, pues también tienen una trayectoria de años y también las personas atendidas ahí han asumido ciertas dinámicas que responden a una clara institucionalización en la que estamos trabajando para conseguir rebajar la intensidad y lograr que al final los pisos, la autonomía, las viviendas sea la política pública predominante.
Apologies, everybody was on the wrong channel. So this is being introduced in Madrid. We don't want to do this abruptly. We intend to boost this next year through a new tender process. We believe that the ongoing process cannot just be broken down overnight. We want to roll it out gradually. But given the results and the analysis that have been done, and what we've found has been done in other autonomous communities and other countries, have also led us to try to naturally improve what we're doing here in Madrid. We still don't have the tender specifications, but I think I can highlight that under the new tender, we're focusing also on employment, which we haven't spoken about up until now. But it's not just having a space where people can start being independent, but also provide all the right tools so that the independence is also an economic independence by boosting their self-esteem. And they can see themselves as completely independent from social services. And here I quote what Andres said. He used to work, Andres was working as a mechanic. And that's another very important thing, to start to sit down and realize, well, what do I want to work with? What do I want to work on? And have the appropriate training so that we can meet this person's needs. Also important is the gender difference. Also, with Sonia, I managed to talk with her sometimes, and also women, homeless women also require special attention. And the percentage of women is lower with regard to men, but also needs to be addressed in this tender, so they also have the opportunities and are represented equally. And the results attained to date and the changes we've seen do encourage us to commit further with this public policy. We have seen that with the current contract and through the agreement in force, that there were about 3 stages in the development of these individuals. First, they took the home as a refuge, as a shelter. It was just for security, physical space where you're no longer afraid of being hurt or people stealing your belongings. From shelter becomes to housing, and here I mean that now is a space that covers the basic needs. You decide when you eat, what you cook, because you're responsible to do that. You have a space for washing, which of course in shelters is more complicated. But the really motivating stage is when we go from housing to a home, an independent home. Housing becomes a space where you can work personal relations, family relations. You can resume a community life where your self-esteem is higher at a personal level, and that is the real driver of change. So if we take into account these 3 stages and also what the local council in Madrid is doing with the resources available and the situation of homelessness, I think we're definitely committed to this approach, not leaving anyone behind, and of course not dismantling the previous process, because it does still help people. Thank you very much, Laura. I think we can be very optimistic and excited about your process. Okay, so the final intervention. Gert de Vol, how do you see the future?
Can you see how Housing First is going to be in the next years in Belgium?
It's hard to predict the future, but I think there will we will continue to work very hard on the housing first methodology, on the scaling up. What I'm really hopeful on is that we are trying to convince. No, we don't have to convince them; they are already convinced. But we have to find a common agenda with all the different levels of the government, the federal government, the local government, the regions, because when things go well and there is money and there is everyone wants to participate and want to say, yeah, we go for housing first, but when it's hard and it's then it's also always the other party or always the other part of the room that's responsible to it. So we are working on a common agenda to have that strategic work where they say we are all committed to housing first, we will all work together, and hopefully we can define some levels of contributions to some common agenda where we can all promote housing first on our own level.
All right, thank you very much, Gert. Thank you very much, Manuel. Muchas gracias, Laura. Muchas gracias, Fermín. Muchas gracias por esta mesa. Damos paso a las conclusiones y a la despedida. Gracias.
Bueno, pues vamos a ir concluyendo. La verdad es que, uy, de verdad, me pasa como a Maribel, que la costumbre de no quitarse. Bueno, muchas gracias para finalizar por venir a este encuentro y por vivir este encuentro, porque yo creo que ha sido emocionante por algunos momentos. Como es emocionante el reto que al inicio comentaba José Manuel de erradicar el sinhogarismo en 2030, ¿no? Como por mucha emoción que le queramos dar y por muy interesante que haya sido el encuentro, estamos ya unas horas en las que cualquier cosa que vayamos a decir
we're kind of late,
como reflejo el que
but
nos miréis con cara de terminar pronto.
I know I can see in your faces that you want me to wrap it up right away, so we will be very brief. I'll ask José Manuel to give us some final conclusions on today's event, and then I'll close it. Thank you very much. José Manuel, go ahead.
Muchas gracias, Edu, y
Thank you,
gracias
Edward.
por la posibilidad de hacer estas reflexiones finales que
allow me to
serán
make
breves,
these final conclusions very briefly.
Eduardo, pues
As Edward is saying, time is
Yo voy a
of
hacer
essence here.
algunas reflexiones
I have some
desde la
thoughts
perspectiva de
from
la planificación de
a
las
planning,
políticas
social
sociales,
planning point of
y
view,
también desde la
and
perspectiva de lo que
also
corresponde, pues, a la visión
from
de una empresa como la nuestra, que lo que
companies
hace
such as
es
ours, what we
asesorar
do,
las
because what we do is provide
administraciones
advice
públicas
to
en el
public
diseño,
sector in the design,
implementación y
implementation,
evaluación de políticas
and assessment of social policies.
Cinco
So just
reflexiones
5
o
quick thoughts or
comentarios
comments, if you
muy
will.
rápidos. El
The
primer
first comment
comentario tiene que ver con el
is
lema
related to
de
the
esta
theme
jornada,
of
¿no?
this event.
Y el título de esta jornada es si
Housing First
es una solución
is
al
whether
sinhogarismo
Housing
en
First
España.
is a solution for
Claro, esta
homelessness in
pregunta es
Spain.
una pregunta mayúscula.
Now, this is a
Es
very
una
big question
pregunta
indeed,
muy importante,
and very
porque
important
en
question, in
realidad
fact, because
lo
of
que
what
supone
it
es que lo que estamos
presupposes,
diciendo es que
what we're saying
si
is,
queremos avanzar
if we want
hacia ahí,
to
lo que
go down this path,
planteamos es cambiar
what we're
un
saying
cambio,
is to
o hacer un
change,
cambio de patrones
or
o de
change
paradigmas
the
en la
paradigm
intervención
in
y la
how we
manera
intervene
en que
and how we
enfocamos la
approach
cuestión de las soluciones a las
the
personas
solutions, how we approach the solution to people
y
without
cambiar los patrones
homeless
de
people, I should say.
intervención,
And then also
cambiar
the
una
patterns of our work, of our intervention, a model of work, which in the case of homelessness goes back for centuries, from the very beginning of the 16th century, the way we help people, homeless people, which means a huge change in culture as well, and it's a revolution. But we're at a time where we're changing the patterns through which we view social policies, because what we're really asking ourselves is whether we can provide a solution to the 30,000 people, more or less, that do not have housing in Spain, and by providing housing as the mainstay of the approach. Now, this is a huge challenge, but if we look at it comparatively, it's not such a difficult challenge. If you have to think that at present there's another change. Just to give you an example, a change in how we serve the elderly. And we're talking about a lot about homes for the elderly, and the first solution for the elderly that cannot live by themselves is to mainly stay in their homes and help them from there. So again, this means we have to change the traditional model of how we work with people that live in homes for the elderly, which is 400,000 people, more than 10 times the people that are homeless. In France, we see a very similar case. Sorry, I mean children. Children that don't have homes, and it has to be an institution, but they should have a home. And 50% of the 50,000 people that are under protection in Spain are in institutions. And what we want to do is go to models that are based on housing, on a home, having a home. So it's a huge challenge, but not that big when we compare it to other cases. So what do we have to do? When there's a change in policy, we have to look at the solutions too. And I think there's two paths here. One, what we're doing new, we're not going to do with a traditional approach or traditional pattern. If we're going to invest in homelessness, then we don't want to repeat the model that we're trying to change. And the second point is that we have to gradually transform the services we provide. Second thought. My second thought is can we change a policy? How does that happen? How does it take place? When a traditional model, when social response changes in society, and what leads us to a more mature social policy? Well, I'm sure there are many factors that account for this, but I would highlight 4 elements that make a traditional social policy can change for good. And of those 4 factors or elements, I would say the first one is to have legal backing. In other words, the rights. We have a right in the Spanish Constitution that says that people have a right to a decent and appropriate housing. And in fact, Article 47 that we've heard about in today's event, whereby public administrations have to have to do whatever is needed to establish those conditions to make that possible. Now we need that to be specific, to specify that in the rights and in housing laws. So legal support, legal backing is sine qua non for a policy to change, to achieve this change. Second is to have scientific proof. And that's what we've done today.
Cada vez se habla más en la Unión
In the
Europea y en
EU
todos los
and across many countries,
países
they talk
de
about
políticas
social
sociales
policies
basadas
based
en
on
evidencias.
proof.
Y hay políticas
And
sociales
certain social
basadas en
policies that are based on
evidencia que
proof
hacen
that
que cambien las cosas.
successfully
Por ejemplo,
change things.
en
For example,
infancia,
for
todo el mundo
children,
está convencido
everyone
de
believes
que cualquier
that any
intervención y
intervention
gasto
and expense
tiene unos
will
efectos
have
muy
a
positivos.
positive
Y por
impact.
eso se está
And that's why
invirtiendo cada vez
we
más
increasingly investing more
en actuaciones tempranas en
in
materia de infancia.
early
En políticas
approach
activas de empleo también hay
to
muchas
children.
evidencias.
And
Por
employment, for
ejemplo,
example,
sabemos
we know
que
that
las bonificaciones a la seguridad
premium
social es dinero que
Social
se tira y
Security
que sin
is money you
embargo
throw
los
away, but
itinerarios de inserción social
the
son
money that's spent for
verificables.
social
Por eso
insertion
se
are
avanza
very
hacia ahí
efficacious.
en
That's
nuestro
why
país.
we're
Ahora
working
mismo
on
lo está
that.
haciendo el SEPE
That's what the
y
SEP
todos
is
los servicios públicos.
to date is doing,
Y
as
en
well as all
políticas de
employment
sinhogarismo tenemos cada vez más evidencias, no solamente
institutions.
por este estudio que se ha
And
hecho en
homelessness
España,
is also
sino
being
por los
successful, not just out of
estudios que se han
the
hecho
trial that
en
we've
otros
conducted here in
muchos
Spain, but
países.
also in many other countries.
Tercera
The
cuestión que
third
hace que
point
cambien las
that
cosas,
makes things, that
las
drives change,
creencias sociales,
is social
las
belief
creencias y convicciones
and
sociales.
social conviction.
¿Qué es lo que nos hace pensar,
What makes us believe,
por ejemplo, que las
that
residencias no son el lugar ideal
homes
para las
are not the
personas
best
que
place
no
for
pueden
people
vivir con
that
autonomía?
cannot live
Pues vemos cómo ha
independently?
cambiado la
Well, we can
mentalidad
see how
con
things have
motivo de la
changed as a
pandemia.
result of the
Y
pandemic.
las creencias y convicciones
And
sociales
social
es que
convictions
cambian muy
and beliefs
rápidamente.
change very quickly.
Es que hace
Just
40 años
40
o
years
40 y
ago,
pico años en España,
in Spain,
las mujeres,
women,
de acuerdo al Código
based
Civil,
on
no tenían ni el derecho
code
a
of
abrir una cuenta
civil
bancaria.
code, could not even open a bank
Cambiado
account.
Las creencias sociales.
And so,
Y las
and
creencias
things, of
sociales,
course, you can
pues,
see how things have
cambian, por
changed.
ejemplo, con respecto
And
a
the
las
way we
personas
see
con
things have changed
discapacidad,
also vis-a-vis
cómo hemos
people
cambiado la
with
mentalidad
disabilities,
en 20, 30 años
and
respecto
how
al
things have changed in the
derecho
past
que
30
tienen
years
las personas con
vis-a-vis
discapacidad
the rights of
de
people with
tener
disabilities
plenos
to have
derechos en nuestra sociedad. Por lo tanto, las
to be fully
creencias
entitled
sociales
to
es
the same
una
thing that other people
cuestión
do.
que
have.
hace que
So,
las políticas cambien.
this
Y
change is
cuarta,
essential.
Cuestión que hace que
Fourthly,
las políticas cambien,
a fourth
a mi modo de
element
ver,
or factor that drives
son
change
el
is
hacerlo en
to
el
do it
momento oportuno.
at the right time.
Seguramente que Eduardo hablará
I'm
de
sure
esto,
Eduardo
pero
will
es el
talk
momento.
about this. But now is the
Es el
time,
momento porque estamos
because
planificando los
we're
fondos
planning the
estructurales,
structural
porque hay una
funds,
ley de vivienda,
there's a housing
porque hay
law,
un debate
there's
social sobre
social
las políticas de
discussion
vivienda, porque hay
on
una
housing policies,
sensibilidad
there's
social,
social
porque
awareness,
tenemos el
because we
mecanismo de
have the
recuperación de
mechanism
resiliencia. Y por lo
to
tanto,
do that,
es
and we have
el
resilience
momento,
to do that. So it's the right time.
Tercera reflexión brevemente.
My third conclusion,
se ha dicho mucho
a
lo
lot
largo
has
de
been
la
discussed
jornada,
that I mentioned
y lo
the other day,
repito simplemente una vez más, no para decir nada nuevo, sino para
and I'd like
decir
to
lo que
say
se
it
ha
again.
dicho a lo largo de la jornada. Y es que
And that
no hay
is,
políticas de personas sin
there are
hogar,
no
sin
policies
políticas
of
de
homelessness
vivienda.
without
Y la
a
vivienda es el
housing
elemento
policy.
fundamental. Y las
Housing
políticas
is
de
the
vivienda
key
tienen
element,
un rol fundamental.
is a key
Por
factor.
supuesto, hay que
And of
garantizar a las
course,
personas
we
los
have to
procesos de
guarantee
acompañamiento. Pero
people
aquí
have
quien
to,
tiene
to have
dar
the
el
guarantee
doble
of
pecho
the right support.
y
But
que tiene
here,
que retratarse
what we're
y
after
quien,
and what we have to,
puede hacer que la
the
solución
people
al
that can
sinhogarismo
that
sea
can provide a solution
posible
to
es
homelessness is
fundamentalmente
mainly,
la
is
política de
basically the
vivienda. Y la
housing
política de
policy.
vivienda
And housing
tiene que
policy
ser
has to be
el motor
the
del
driving,
modelo de cambio
the driver
y el motor
to lead change
del modelo de Housing First.
and the model
Y
for
sin
Housing First.
implicación activa de
Without
políticas
having
de
active
vivienda,
policy,
sin implicación activa de políticas de
active
vivienda,
housing
no habrá
policy, we won't
soluciones al
have
sinhogarismo
a solution, a final solution to a sustainable
Luego,
solution
¿esto
to
nos parece,
homelessness.
algo irrealizable
Again, is this
teniendo en cuenta las necesidades
impossible,
sociales que hay de
considering
vivienda?
the situation,
Pero bueno,
considering
si
the
vamos
needs, housing needs that we have?
retrospectivamente,
Well, if we look
hacia
back,
atrás, podemos ver cómo en los
we can
años
see how
70
back
y
in the
80 del
70s and
siglo
the
pasado
80s,
se construyó política de
we
promoción,
developed
se hizo
policies
vivienda de promoción
for
pública
housing, social housing across Spain, and specifically also in Madrid. My final and fourth conclusion
a la que también se ha hecho referencia varias veces,
which
y
has
que
been
hacía
stated
Fermín
a
referencia
number
en
of
su
times, and Fermín said it also in the course of his discussion.
para encontrar
In
una
order to
solución
find
definitiva a
a
los
final
problemas del
solution
sinhogarismo,
to homelessness,
tenemos que trabajar desde una
we
cooperación
have to
público-privada.
have private
Los
and
poderes
public
públicos
cooperation.
tienen
Public
unas
powers
obligaciones
have certain
y tienen
commitments
unas
and obligations and
responsabilidades,
responsibilities.
pero los
But
poderes públicos y
public
las
powers
políticas
and
públicas
public
per se
public policies per
no
se,
encontrarán
on their
una
own,
solución
will not find a
¿Por qué?
final solution.
Por algo muy
Why?
esencial. Porque
Well, basically,
en toda Europa,
essentially,
cuando digo en toda Europa,
because
digo
across
en
Europe,
todos los países de
and
Europa,
here I mean all of
nuestros
Europe,
sistemas de protección social,
our
nuestro modelo
social
de
protection
bienestar
system and
social,
our social
van a
well-being
un
models
modelo de bienestar
are moving
mixto,
towards a
en
mixed
el cual
model,
hay un
whereby
protagonismo muy
there's
activo
active
de la
protagonism
sociedad
of
civil
social
y hay un
society, civil
protagonismo
society,
muy
but
activo
also
de la
of
iniciativa privada.
the
Por lo
private
tanto, esto no
sector.
va o hace la administración pública o hace
It's not
la
who
iniciativa
does
privada.
what.
Esto va de
It's hand in
Estado
hand.
fuerte y de sociedad civil fuerte
It's
y de
strong state,
cooperación,
strong civil
iniciativa
society,
pública, iniciativa
public and
privada.
private, hand
Y
in hand.
última reflexión,
And
pues
final
tenemos que
conclusion,
seguir pensando en retos
we
de
need
futuro
to
y en
keep
esos retos de futuro
an eye,
claramente
close
la
eye on
prevención,
future
de la que
challenges.
se ha hablado hoy poco aquí,
We've spoken
es
very
un reto
little
de
today
futuro
about prevention.
claro, la
And
especialización es
this is
un reto de
important.
futuro también, claro,
Specialization
y
is
también
also
las
a challenge in the
soluciones,
future, and
a
as well
nuevos perfiles de
as
personas sin hogar.
addressing the new profiles of homelessness that are coming up. Yes, new profiles indeed. We've discussed that in the course of this morning. The approach, housing approach, are now being integrated in how things are changing for people that have different grades of disability or levels of disability, and how we, for example, help and support women victims of gender violence. All these different areas that we are readdressing. Okay, I'm going to be even. I'm going to be very brief because some of the things I was going to share with you have already been discussed with José Manuel, and I do believe, of course, we've spoken about housing first, but also about empirical evidence. In Spain, we don't have a lot of culture here. Very few cases of similar trials. So 3 very quick conclusions from my point. First one, something that came up time and again. We've heard about these 2 different positions on how housing first can also coexist with other models, because models focused on housing, what they're driving is a transformation of the current system. We think it's critical to transform the system based on housing. Not just housing first, but certainly housing as a way as leading that process is far more cost efficient than traditional systems. Housing first, of course, is an innovative system, but it's been around for some years now. And it's also, we have to look into the size of housing first in Spain. According to the INE, the National Institute for Statistics, what we found is that the average number of homes is 430. We've gone up by 30%, but we're far from the numbers that we need in order to attain our objectives. And here we need to make political decisions, and that is to stop opening more shelters or institutionalized centers and being more committed to homes with the right support. Everything we've heard today, so we're changing our system. We have 26,000 homes for emergency. They're not really providing the solutions we want and consuming resources, and still with problems. And what we find is that 80-something% of people, after they have their home, remain there. When they provide a stable solution and a solution that adapts to their needs, what we find is that we get immediate results, it's more efficient, and we actually contribute to solve the problem. And also, if I may, I think
HOGAR SÍ,
at the beginning of the event with HOGAR SÍ, is the Provivienda and HOGAR SÍ program. I think we've heard of another example with Laura, Fermín, of leadership of public administrations, leadership that can be shared, that can be public and private, of course, in nature.
Una estrategia
And
desarrollada
it has to be a strategy that has to be solidly developed by public administrations. We've spoken about the national strategy for people without, for homeless people.
Enorme, ¿no?
And that will have
yo creo que los casos que han salido de Dinamarca, Finlandia, también
significant importance. Different example we've heard of Italy, Denmark, Belgium, Finland, etc. It's part of it. It has to be part of a policy that's actively implemented, not just nice words. And it has to be, of course, supported financially with its own item in the national budget. The second conclusion we've heard about is the cooperation between social services and housing policies. It's an individual problem, it's also a structural problem. These are policies, housing policies that have been deficient, poor. Of course, there are certain elements of them that can be rescued and reused. I don't want to say that everything has been bad, but we don't want to bury all these policies. The housing policy basically is to address many different areas and not just find a single solution for them all. With snapping our fingers, and of course increasing also the number of publicly available homes. So I welcome also in this regard the presentation of the Secretary of State for Homes, David Lucas, when he spoke about the fifth pillar of well-being. Of course, we have to, naturally, it has to become a fact.
La verdad es que no nos imaginábamos que luego podíamos escuchar al secretario de Estado referirse también a esos términos.
It was good to hear the Secretary of State to actually address that particular point. Also, the plan for 2022-2025, we will follow up on that to make sure that it's not just on paper, because paper will support anything. We want to make sure that actually rolls out and becomes an active policy for the ultimate purpose, of course, of addressing homelessness. And I think we've seen very good examples. The fact that we had the Secretary of State of Social Affairs and of Housing is a very good example of the commitment. And you also mentioned, and also said that the time is now. We have two legislatures ahead of us. We have the laws, we have public administration support and committed. We have experiences already, the tools, the legal backing that we need. We have the funds as an opportunity, in fact, to change our service system. So a lot of opportunities ahead of us to meet this challenge head on. And the resources, human resources, like Andrés, is the key to be able to talk about his experience and how you change and how that enables you to go forward. And so, as the song goes, the time is now. So I'd like to thank again the presence of the Secretary of State, David Lucas, Secretary of State for Social Affairs and Social Rights, of the different speakers that have joined us today, and of course, Andrés, and all of you who have come with us, and also the Ministry of Social Affairs and Agenda 2030 for organizing and for allowing us to celebrate here. We're going to close this event with a very short video, which will show the highlights of the Housing First trial in Spain. And I'd also like to ask all attendees that when you walk out, to please return the receivers for translation. Thank you very much.